kind of the, you need to make a surge now for the Cardinals. We've heard different veterans say it. If they want to make a run, they have to do it now. They got to start winning games. It's not just about winning series anymore. It's about stringing together winning streaks, something this team really hasn't been able to do all season. That starts now, and they're doing it against a time in the schedule that really does not bode in their favor. I will say this. If they figure out a way to get through the next 3 weeks and they stay in playoff position, my personal opinion about the club in September goes up. I feel much better about the situation.
That was the voice of Katie Woo, our Cardinals insider on The Athletic, talking about her faith in the Cardinals as they head into an absolutely brutal stretch of baseball games following their sweep against the Cincinnati Reds. And along with Tanner Hendrickson and Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. Final day for me here in my little hot box of a studio. I'll be back in 101 ESPN's building next week. But, boys, the Cardinals start off this stretch tonight against the Dodgers, 3 games against L.A., and I think it's important to point out that they do have a day off in between, and then 3 games against Milwaukee, 3 games against Minnesota, 4 games against San Diego, 3 games against the New York Yankees, and then they wrap up this stretch with 3 games against Milwaukee before they get another day off. And currently, as it stands, the Cardinals are 4 games out of that final wild card spot. I'm not even going to tell you how many games are behind the Milwaukee Brewers because, frankly, Milwaukee's on a hot streak. You're not catching them. So you're chasing the Atlanta Braves along with the Mets, the Giants, and the Reds. But, T-Bone, the stretch that they're about to go into, Katie's absolutely right. You got a chance to keep the faith for some Cardinals fans of making it into the postseason.
I even wore a Cardinals shirt to try and keep the faith today. And I went with like an 80s logo because they were good then, so maybe it'll bring off good vibes.
T-Bone's channeling the heat is on vibes right now for this Cardinals team, but it does really feel like this season is on the brink of being over or keeping the optimism with this next stretch of games. You've got 22 games the rest of the way against teams above 500. I just listed off some of those. For me, T-Bone, you got to be above 500 in this next stretch going all the way up until that second series against the Milwaukee Brewers. If you're above 500 in that stretch, that gives you a chance to go through the month of September against some lesser teams to fight for the postseason. But, man, if you're under 500, if you can't find a way to win at least 2 series, you're going to be in for a world of hurt once September opens up.
Yeah, I think it's going to take, and this is like a conservative approach, if it takes 85 wins to potentially be dancing in October,
which I think it does. Like, Atlanta's on pace for 85.
It's going to take 85, and like maybe they get a little bit hotter, so let's say like 85 to 87. But let's operate on the conservative side. Cross our fingers, cross our toes. Hey, we've got the tiebreaker on Atlanta. Let's shoot for that 85 that they're on pace for. If the Cardinals go just 500 in this stretch of these 22 games and go 11-11, that would put them at 71-72 with 19 games left to play. That would mean to get to that 85 win mark, they would have to go 14-5 in that next stretch of games after that, which, again, that's hard to do, but they do have a little bit favorable of a schedule. Once you get past this 22-game stretch, you finish home against the Juggernaut Reds.
No, that'll be an easy series.
Yeah,
who you can't beat.
At the Toronto Blue Jays. 4 with the Pirates.
Vladimir Guerrero Jr., by the way, looking like shades of his dad right now.
Yeah, he's on fire. 4 with the Pirates at home, 3 against the Guardians, which is not easy at home, and then you wrap up the year at Colorado and at San Francisco. So going 14-5 in that stretch feels hard. So let's operate on the assumption of, okay, so they've got to be better than 500 in this 22-game stretch against above 500 teams and playoff locks, essentially. So let's say they end up going, Ferrario, where they win, 13 games in this stretch. They end up going 13-9. That will put them at that. That would put you at 73-70, which means you would have to go 12-7 in the final 19 games to get to where you get to that 85-win mark.
Which, to put that into context, I looked this up because I was curious when the last time the Cardinals have done that, if they've done that this season. And 12-7 is the record that they put together from May 13th all the way up until the first week of June 5th. That was when they went through that stretch of beating the Angels, the Red Sox, the Orioles, the Cubs, the Reds. They lost to the Phillies and the Astros, but still picked up 1 win. And to put this into further context, T-Bone, of why I feel like this is so impossible, let's go with the just easy route of going 500 in this next stretch of games, 11-11. That means you have to pick up at least out of the 6 series, you have to pick up at least 4 series wins if you want to pick up 11 victories in this stretch of games. You have to win 4 series between the Dodgers, the Brewers, the Twins, the Padres, the Yankees, and the Brewers once again. That seems like a massive uphill task to ask for.
Yeah, this is the bed that they laid for themselves, you know. This is where they put themselves, and this is why that Red Series was so disappointing and why they needed to try and build just slight momentum coming into this stretch. Now, I think it's going to be hard to see them go through this stretch, but if the offense will wake up, now granted we've been saying that since the season started, but if their offense starts to hit and they start to produce and start coming through with runners in scoring position, they'll have a chance at least that 500 mark. And then it just comes down to, can they go on another one of those classic Cardinals heaters where it is, you know, nobody has faith in them and somehow they end up making the playoffs. It's a tough task. They're going to need some help as well, but they've got to take care of their business, and it's just going to come down to the lineup for me. You know, as much as we talk about the starting pitching and, hey, Mikolas goes today, their offense is going to have to come through. And it's going to be a difficult task because this is playoff caliber rotations. But if you want to make the playoffs and have a chance to dance in October, well, your playoffs have started today, and you're going up against playoff caliber rotations. Now you find out what the offense is really about.
And here's the bad thing, too, is that the Dodgers are coming in off of 2 games that they just lost to the Brewers. And it's not like they don't have anything to play for while they are leading their division. The Padres and the Diamondbacks are both 2 games behind them, breathing down their necks. So they have a lot to play for, and it feels like this is sort of the get-right series for the Dodgers after just dropping back-to-back games in Milwaukee. And it feels like at this point, the Cardinals are everybody's get-right series. And hopefully it's not the case, but for the Dodgers, that's what it looks like coming into St. Louis this weekend.
Yeah, I hate to break it to Cardinals fans, and like, look, I wanted this team to be a playoff team because I wanted to get to see some signs of life, but like, you've kind of become the slump buster for a lot of teams, like the Kansas City Royals when they took you on. Tampa Bay took 2 of 3 from you. Chicago took 2 of 3. Cincinnati, you're basically the jumping off point for Cincinnati to believe they're in the postseason right now, and then you've got more teams in that circumstance. So you got the Dodgers. Realistically, if there were areas that I look at the schedule and say, like, I think you could win the series, it should be against the Dodgers because they're struggling right now, like Grant just mentioned. It should be one of the series against the Milwaukee Brewers because you see them twice in a 3-week sample size. It should be the Minnesota Twins, who are kind of in somewhat of the same boat as you, although Minnesota is playing a little bit better offensively than you right now. And it really should be the New York Yankees. But I look at all of these things, and to what Tanner mentioned is why I'm so skeptical. This isn't about your pitching staff finding ways to come through. We know what this pitching staff has been. We talked about it yesterday. This isn't about your bullpen finding signs of life once again. I don't know if that's going to happen. This is all about your offense. And we'll talk more about kind of what the playing for beyond this season is all about this season. But, T-Bone, when I look at this stretch, I'm keeping my eye on one area. And that area is your left-handed bats. Because you know what the right-handed bats are. You got guys like Mason Wynn, who have been great. Wilson Contreras, who's been arguably your MVP this season. Goldschmidt and Arenado are who exactly they say they are. The left-handed bats are going to be the deciding factor into all of this. Because you're going into an offseason where if these guys don't perform and show the ability to carry your offense in a pivotal time of the season, then if I'm the Cardinals, I'm looking at this saying, do I really have a spot for Gorman beyond this season? Do I really have a spot for Lars Nootbaar beyond this season? Because if these left-handed bats can't come through for me when I desperately need them, then it might be time for me to look for bats elsewhere.
Yeah, I think this stretch, because I'm very skeptical that you see the offense turn around. And I saw in the text line someone said they've played 121 games. What makes you think they're going to turn around? I really don't think they're going to turn it around. We were running through what the scenario is if they are going to do it, and it's somehow the offense doing what we haven't expected. But I think this is the stretch where you find out what these left-handed bats are made of. You've got Nolan Gorman that will probably get a decent amount of starts. We'll see against right-handed pitching. We'll see how they decide to operate with him. He's been 13% below league average this year. Brendan Donovan, 2% above league average. Lars Nootbaar, 8% below league average. Those 3 left-handed bats were supposed to be kind of the pillars, at least that young core that was supposed to help support Goldie and Arenado. And they have underperformed this year, along with Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado. Right. I think in theory, they should be letting Paul Goldschmidt walk at the end of the season. Nolan Arenado might be stuck with him. the left-handed bats are still ones that could still hold trade value in the offseason. And I think this is the stretch where you say, okay, I mentioned earlier, this is their playoffs. They are playing playoff baseball starting today in this 22-game stretch against playoff opponents to try and keep their season alive. We're going to see what the left-handed bats are made of because they need them to produce, especially because you're getting ready to go through a pretty big stretch here where you're mostly seeing right-handed starting pitchers. So the left-handed bats, you're going to figure out who is the guy that you say, okay, he can take his game to the next level. Been a weird year, but you know what? He's able to showcase himself for the final month and a half here. He's able to help us. And you're going to find out if any of the left-handed bats are guys that you just look at and say, you know what? It may not work here in St. Louis, and we may need to capitalize while there's still trade value on him in the offseason.
Yeah, because the right-handed bats, in my opinion, you know what they are, and honestly, you're kind of stuck with some of these guys. Like, you're not moving on from Nolan Arenado. You know what Paul Goldschmidt is, like TiVo mentioned. You're probably walking away from that at the end of the season. Wilson Contreras has been great for you. Mason Wynn, yeah, he's been a little spotty lately. Your right-handed bats are set. You don't have to worry about it. But if there's areas that I'm looking at and I'm saying, what do I need to learn still about this team? I think it's all about those left-handed bats. Because the one thing that made BK so excited, saying that it could be a 2004-esque playoff roster. Remember, I said that. 2004, BK said it, the Cardinals offense, 2004-esque. But those left-handed bats, those were the reason why people were optimistic. Nolan Gorman's 40 home run potential. Lars Nootbaar being peak Lars. Brendan Donovan being the guy that everybody expected to be the leadoff hitter for this player and the guy that kind of was the heartbeat of the Cardinals. You're not going to see a whole lot of Jordan Walker if the Cardinals are going to continue this. So there's really only one area that you can learn more about this team, and it's these left-handed bats. And if they don't come through for you at the end of this season, then I do think the Cardinals should view this as, hey, we might need to make some changes to this offense, and the best way for us to go about it is moving on from some of these bats that aren't who we thought they were.
Yeah, and right now, I think we went to the offseason and we discussed, last offseason, excuse me. I think Donovan was probably an untouchable. I think Nootbaar in the Cardinals' eyes was probably an untouchable. Gorman, maybe he would have been available for the perfect chip, like a Logan Gilbert.
I think a lot of people said he was untouchable, though.
But a lot of people, I think you're right, said he was untouchable. I think if you were to ask the Cardinals today, are any of those three left-handed bats untouchable? The answer is probably no. Now, maybe they can change that if they can kind of heat up and help lift the Cardinals through this stretch. Then I think you could see where one or two of those left-handed bats, or hell, if all three end up hitting in this stretch. I'm doubtful of that, but if they do, I think you could see where they get back in that conversation. I think the left-handed bats, I don't think all three of them are playing for their future as a Cardinal because I can't see them trading all three of them in the offseason. But I do think they are trying to show, okay, I am the one that you want to keep, while the other two, maybe you start to explore what you can get for them on the market.
Yeah, he's Tanner Hendrickson. I'm Alex Ferrario. We want to hear from you today as well. Air Comfort Service text line 314-399-9646. We're going to get to this topic a little bit later on because the morning show talked about the Cardinals playing for 2025 and not focused on 2024 anymore. So we'll discuss that, and we want your mic drops today. You could send those over on the 101 ESPN app. We're also going to talk a little more Blues and get the Edmonton Oilers perspective on these offer sheet situations. Daniel Nugent-Bowman of The Athletic is going to join us at 12:15. Also at 11:30 today, it is Fantasy Football Friday, so you send us your fantasy football questions over on our Air Comfort Service text line. We'll get to those at the bottom of the hour. We're also live up on our YouTube page at 101 ESPN STL. Our cameras brought to you by the Air Alliance team. Graveyard up and running. So much to get to today from 11 to 2. Coming up next, Philip Broberg, still, of course, in that offer sheet purgatory if the Oilers are going to match or if he is going to be a Blue. But I want to go down the hypothetical path that the Blues get Philip Broberg in this offer sheet. What does his acquisition mean for the Blues in this retool? We'll discuss that and who's the odd man out on this defense next on 101 ESPN. So we talk so much about the Blues' potential of acquiring both Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway from the Edmonton Oilers. Of course, the offer sheets that were given out on Tuesday. Oilers have 7 days to respond, which I think is about 9:30 a.m. on Tuesday. Still really no news coming from this one, as I would expect. Edmonton kind of keeping things close to the chest. Stan Bowman's first real decision is going to be what they do with these two players. But I want to go down the hypothetical path of the Blues get Philip Broberg. We'll talk about Dylan Holloway a little bit later, but let's just focus in that the Blues get Philip Broberg. And with Tanner Hendrickson and Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. I was thinking about this yesterday after we had discussed kind of where the Blues are at with all of this. And in my opinion, if they do find a way to get Philip Broberg, this pushes the retool a year forward. And here's why. The forward group is set. Right now, you're kind of in a holding period for guys like Jimmy Snuggerud to come up, guys like Dalibor Dvorsky to develop, Zach Bolduc to develop, getting a couple of players from overseas like Donato Stenberg. All of these guys are in the system. They're developing. They've been drafted. Now it's a waiting period. You don't have that same factor on defense. There's really nobody in the system, with the exception of Theo Lindstein, that Blues fans are waiting for to just get the development stage. Sure, you just drafted a couple of guys who might be good pieces in the far future, and Adam Jiricek and Colin Ralph, a couple of these players, but there's no defenseman that you look at and you say, he's the future of this team. That biggest name right now is Matt Kessel. And Matt Kessel looks great. But Matt Kessel might be a fringe second-pair defenseman. Who knows? Philip Broberg, although there are some question marks surrounding him, at 23 years old, who has the potential to be a top-pair defenseman, and I know I'm getting way out over my skis, even after Mark Spector had told us, like, yeah, you're probably talking about a top-4 guy. But anytime you put a guy's name in the conversation of a Jay Bouwmeester who can skate excellent, who's big, who's lengthy, who can break passes up with his play and skate probably of the best of them in the league, that expedites your retool in a way that you look at and you say, cool, now our core on defense is starting to get set. So if you break it up into pieces, T-Bone, your goaltending, in my opinion, you can lock it up, put it away, don't have to worry about it. You've got Binnington, you've got Hofer, you've got a couple of guys in the system who could be here 5-6 years from now. Your forward group, as I mentioned, you've got the core pieces in place. It's just a matter of developing them. And now you're talking about having a Broberg, a Lindstein, a Jiricek, a Kessel, on top of already having established guys like Colton Parayko in your system. This at least puts you in a position to where in a year, in 2 years, you could be talking about these guys already developing and turning into a team that can start competing in the postseason.
Yeah, and I think for the retool, it takes that step forward, to your point, if Broberg is a hit, and it isn't okay, we need a couple years of growing pains for that to necessarily be the case. Here would be my question. Long term, if Philip Broberg is the guy that they think he is, and it's why they paid him, and we talked about this earlier in the week, the offer sheet's for like $4.5 million or 4.125, somewhere in that range. That's like $3 million more than what was projected for him, because he did not play a lot in the NHL last year in the regular season.
Yeah, I think
got his
Friedman said
opportunity
it was
in playoffs.
I think Friedman said it was a 250% raise.
So the Blues did that for a reason, because they think, one, they need to lure him away from Edmonton, force the hand of the Oilers to try and match that offer sheet, and two, because they believe in him. If they believe in Philip Broberg and he ends up being the guy that they think he is, long term, is he the guy that plays with Colton Parayko on the left side?
Absolutely. I believe so, because if you have a big body defenseman who's supposed to be, he's not an offensive weapon. To me, the Blues view Theo Lindstein as the offensive weapon for them. He's the Scott Perunovich 2.0 that Perunovich never turned into. What Philip Broberg is what you've been searching for since Jay Bouwmeester went into retirement. A big defenseman who can play the left side, who can break up plays and have speed. Think of the guys they've gone through looking for that. Marco Scandella, Nico Mikolas. They've tried multiple different players. Joel Edmondson at the longest time was used in that spot. Nobody panned out for it. And now you bring in a 6'4" left-handed defenseman that my guess is they view long-term is a pairing partner with Colton Parayko until Colton Parayko's time in St. Louis is done.
And the reason I asked that question, because I agree. I think that's what the long-term plan is. Maybe not even this year. Like, it still probably will be letting Parayko for the most part this year, if not all of this year, if you get Philip Broberg. The reason I ask that question is, what have I been saying when we talk about the Blues retool? I've said the path to get out of the retool is to find Colton Parayko's partner. You can't exit the retool unless you find his partner. And if they end up being right on Philip Broberg, all right, now you're talking. Because now you've got that shutdown defensive pairing. You've got a couple of nice pieces in Kessel. We'll see who they end up having him with in terms of long-term. Like, they'll still have to figure out the second pair, but Lindstein can end up maybe becoming a second-pair defenseman for you that is a guy that runs a power play for you, for example. Now you can start to see where they're going with their blue line, which has been a major problem and is really the thing that kind of snowballed them towards a retool, if you think about it. So that's why I love this aggressive move that Doug Armstrong decided to make in trying to offer Philip Broberg, or offer sheeting Philip Broberg, because worst case scenario, you end up being wrong. You've got him for 2 years. Maybe you give him another year or two to see if he can kind of develop with you a little bit. Worst case scenario, you're wrong. At least you can say you tried it. Best case scenario, you just found Colton Parayko's long-term partner.
Real quick, Alex, have you seen the stats that Philip Broberg put up in the playoffs this past season?
Yeah, I did.
He was a +8. He was not a minus in any game he played in the playoffs. He played 3 games against Dallas, and he played in every game against Florida. And he averaged 15 minutes, 48 seconds time on ice per game. Had 2 goals and an assist. And again, not a minus in a single game. And he was a +8 in those games. That's why the Blues look at that as a huge opportunity, because in the biggest games of the season, he was showing up and playing well.
Well, and that's a great point, Grant, because then also look at the other factor into us. And this is the part that I just disagree with Mark Spector. And look, Mark's seen a lot more of him than I have, but just looking at a stat sheet, how many games did we watch Scott Perunovich and say, dude, shoot the puck, shoot the puck? Well, in the amount of postseason games that Philip Broberg played this season, there were 10 games. He scored 2 goals, had 3 points. He had 6 total shots on goal, and he was averaging 15 minutes and 48 seconds of ice time. So, like, you're getting a guy who is barely playing and finding ways to get pucks on net. Now what happens when you put him in a top 4 role? And the other factor into what T-Bone mentioned is look at the timeline of the salary cap, or the contracts that are handed out. Nick Leddy's contract, he's a UFA the same time Philip Broberg is a UFA. Both have 2 more years. You're seeing that slow transition to where Leddy and Parayko this year, depending on how Broberg develops, if he's a member of the St. Louis Blues, maybe by the end of this season, he starts to get a little bit more ice time with Colton Parayko. And by next year, Nick Leddy's playing a little bit less minutes and Broberg's playing. And then by the time he's an RFA and you give him a contract extension, now you're looking at it and saying, wow, we've got our guy to play with Colton Parayko. Your core, Doug Armstrong referenced prior to the Broberg contract offer sheet. This was during the prospect camp. He mentioned Jiricek, he mentioned Theo Lindstein, he mentioned Colton Parayko, and he mentioned, who was the other left-handed? Oh, that Colin Routh that they just drafted. He mentioned guys that are young in the system and now implement a 23-year-old. So that's the bigger picture, and that's if they hit on him. But now let's go to the now. Because I've seen a ton of questions by people on our Air Comfort Service text line, on the YouTube chat, of what does this defense look like? Who's the odd man out if Broberg is a part of this team? Because if I'm not mistaken, Broberg signs a contract that would give you 9 total defensemen under contract for next year. And in my opinion, they're only going to carry 7. Maybe they carry 8. First things first, I think Tyler Tucker's in the minor leagues. I don't know if Tyler Tucker's here. I think he's an easy one that you can kind of sneak through waivers. He's kind of a guy that is a one-trick pony, and honestly, I think you brought in Pierre-Olivier Joseph to do what Tyler Tucker can offer. I don't know if Scott Perunovich is on this roster. I think what you're looking at is Leddy and Parayko, Broberg and Falk, Suter and Kessel, with your 7th defenseman being a Pierre-Olivier Joseph and Torrey Krug being on LTIR. And I think either Scott Perunovich gets moved or Scott Perunovich is in the American Hockey League, because it's more beneficial for the Blues to carry 2 extra forwards than 1 extra forward and 2 defensemen, because Scott Perunovich does one thing. He does the offense, he plays the power play for you, but who's coming out for that guy?
Yeah, I am with you. I think you see Tucker down in the minors. For me, that one is easy. And then it just comes down to, do you want to carry 8 defensemen? And if you do carry 8 defensemen, I don't know what the benefit is for, say, a Scott Perunovich, for example, because, look, he had his opportunity last year. They got the right amount of games to get the RFA status for him to where they could sign him to a contract and keep him. But is it better for him to be sitting in the press box, or should he be down playing still? And I understand, you're past the point of, well, do you really worry about Scott Pernovich's development? Not really at this point, but he still is someone that has lost a ton of time due to injury. So maybe you send him down there or you trade him in training camp. We've seen this all the time where they will end up moving guys. It's like a, third, fourth round pick that you end up getting, but you move on from him. You gain a small asset in return, and then rather than just stuffing him down to the AHL. But I think you're right. Right now, to me, Scott Perunovich is the odd man out, and Joseph is probably your seventh defenseman.
Yeah, and the one thing that JR, Donnie, and I just did a Last Minute Blues podcast, shameless plug right there for you, but the one thing JR brought up that I completely forgot of is Blues and Edmonton can still make a trade. Like, Edmonton can't trade Broberg or Holloway if they match the offers and they're a member of the team. But as it stands right now, at least if I'm understanding the CBA correctly, the Blues could still find a way to make a trade with Edmonton for Broberg and Holloway so that they get more than just the draft pick compensation, which, no reporting here, pure speculation. Maybe an opportunity to move a Scott Perunovich and give a young defenseman to a team that's losing a young defenseman on the left side. We'll talk more about the Oilers' offer sheet conundrum with Daniel Nugent-Bowman, the athletic insider for the Oilers. He'll come up with us at about 12:15. We'll get more into Dylan Holloway in the 1 o'clock hour. We've got Ask Us Anything coming up at 15 minutes, but get that Air Comfort Service text line rolling now, 314-399-9646. You can also send us messages over on our YouTube chat at The Graveyard up on 101 ESPN STL, because it is a Fantasy Football Friday, and your master in charge of all fantasy football knowledge, T-Bone, is here to answer questions. Send us fantasy football questions. We'll answer them next here on Fantasy Football Friday on 101 ESPN.
Grant Francis here with a SportsCenter update brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling. Cardinals had an off night last night. They are 60-61 following that Red Series in which they were swept. They'll look to get back to 500 tonight as they welcome in the Dodgers, who are coming off of a 4-game series in Milwaukee in which they split those 4 games. They lost the 2 most recent games, so they're coming off of back-to-back losses as they head to Busch Stadium tonight. It'll be Miles Mikolas in the first game of this series, and first pitch from Busch Stadium will be at 7:15. I'm Grant Francis. The SportsCenter update's been brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling, an independent American Standard heating and air conditioning dealer.
All right, it is a Fantasy Football Friday here on BK and Ferrario, a new benchmark for us every Friday. We are answering your fantasy football questions. You got the reigning 2-time Fantasy Football 101 ESPN champion. You've got the backup champion and Alex Ferrario, even though BK and Tanner like to deny it. And you've got Grant Francis, who literally hates kickers in fantasy football. So we are all here for your knowledge today on Fantasy Football Friday. You send us your questions. We will give you some answers on those. It's different than questions and answers because we're strictly doing fantasy football. 314-399-9646. You can also send them over on our Graveyard chat at 101 ESPN STL on YouTube. Before we get to your questions, T-Bone, I know you had one that popped up.
Yeah, so I just saw this. Yahoo Fantasy Sports released their all-fade team, the guys that you should avoid drafting this year, and I'm curious your guys' thoughts. Here are the guys that they have. They listed 2 running backs, 2 wideouts, a tight end, and a quarterback. So I'm just going to run through these real quick. Tell me if there's one that you disagree with that you're saying you should still target. Quarterback, avoid C.J. Stroud. Running backs, Josh Jacobs and Devon Achane. The wideouts, Chris Olave and Jalen Waddle, and the tight end, Trey McBride.
Okay, I totally disagree with C.J. Stroud. Like, C.J. Stroud, in my opinion, is going to be a top 5 fantasy football quarterback this year. I can understand why they're saying that because there's so many options and they don't think it's going to be the sophomore slump, but I think that's trash. I do agree with Devon Achane. I'd be a little worried about that. I don't agree with Josh Jacobs. I wonder if they use the hell out of Josh Jacobs because he's Green Bay, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're going to use the hell out of Josh Jacobs. If not just as the running back, you're going to use as a check down guy. Chris Olave, I find myself always fading. And who is the tight end?
Trey McBride of the Arizona Cardinals.
Man, everybody's been talking so highly about Trey McBride, and I don't know if I agree with that now because now that they got Marvin Harrison Jr., I wonder if that opens up some coverage for McBride. So Olave and Achane, I absolutely agree with. I totally disagree with C.J. Stroud.
Yeah, I'm with you, Alex. Definitely on the C.J. Stroud. That was the one that stood out to me the most. After what you saw last season and the weapons that were acquired by the Texans to even further help C.J. Stroud this season, I know you call it the sophomore slump, but he was so good last season that – I mean, if you're taking a quarterback later on, like if you're not taking Patrick Mahomes at the top of the quarterback list, I think C.J. Stroud is one of the quarterbacks that I would be banking on the most.
Yeah, I agree with Achane because I don't know what that running back room is really going to look like because they still got Mostert, who was pretty good last year. I agree with Chris Olave because I was pretty disappointed in his production last year. I had him in my other league.
And I just don't like Derek Carr. So
yeah, that too. I don't like his quarterback situation. I actually try to avoid Josh Jacobs because I worry about his health.
Makes sense.
When he is healthy, he's been a good running back, and he's a solid guy to have on your fantasy team. But like last year, 13 games played, 805 yards, was solid, 6 touchdowns. I worry about his health a little bit, so I try to avoid Josh Jacobs as well.
All right, let's get to some of your fantasy football questions. 314-399-9646. This one from the 417. Tanner, I'm in a dynasty league and picked up Puka off of waivers in camp last year before he was a breakout. Traded for Kupp also a few years ago during his Triple Crown season. Now I have both of them in my lineup and don't know if I should start both, play one, or trade one away.
I would start both for now. Now, granted, we don't know who else is on his roster, but right now I would plan on starting both because Matthew Stafford, those are his, 2 favorite targets. They're going to eat up a giant share of his targets. He doesn't really have a third wideout. Like, they liked Robinson. They liked that kid they drafted in the 6th round from Texas. Their tight ends aren't really known for pass catching right now because Tyler Higbee's out. I would say you start both. I think you're going to see that early on in the season. Both of them are going to get a big target share. Once we get a little bit later on, that's when I think it gets a little bit more of a question of whether to go with both.
And not only that, but their defense is awful, correct? So they're going to have to win a lot of shootout games, high-scoring games, so that means more points for the receivers.
Yeah.
Yep. From the 5-7-3, guys, where would you take the top 3 Jets? Rodgers, Wilson, Hall. So I've done a few fantasy mock drafts now. I've been taking Breece Hall second round, third round, kind of. Now, some places I've seen him go earlier than that because there's only a few running backs that are at the top of the level. But if I could get Breece Hall, if I could get Breece Hall in the second or third round, I'm absolutely taking that. Rodgers, I'm not touching that until I'm getting later in the draft because I just don't trust him to stay healthy.
Yeah, I think when you talk about Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson, I'm looking late first, early second, depending on where you're at. Somewhere in that range. I think with Aaron Rodgers, I'm kind of with you. He's more of a later round. I don't really know what round I would say. He kind of falls into, once you start getting into that conversation of, Matt Stafford, Kirk Cousins, Justin Herbert, that's when, depending on how your draft goes, that's when you can start to really look at him and say, okay, do I want to take Aaron Rodgers? He should put up solid numbers, but I would wait a little bit. He's not near the top tier quarterbacks for me.
T-Bone. Sorry, Alex. I was just going to ask, since you're the wide receiver guy, T-Bone, if Wilson and Breece Hall are both available in the first round and you're picking one, which one are you picking?
I'm taking Wilson. I always lean wide receiver over running back because
Breece Hall is so good, though.
If you think of it, and what he's a little bit different, Breece Hall, because he'll get into the receiving game a little bit, especially with Rodgers now this year. But when you think about who is it easier to put up, let's just say 10 points, for example. It's so, without a touchdown, by the way, it's so much easier for a wideout to put up 10 points than a running back. And
Absolutely.
That's why I always target wide receivers because it's so much easier to lock in their guarantee than it is running backs. And running backs, we've seen it. It's a lot harder for a running back to stay healthy throughout a season than a wide receiver. Why? Because the running back, he's not getting hit by the corners that often or the safeties. He's getting blown up by those big defensive tackles and those defensive ends and those linebackers. I always lean wide receiver over running back.
Yeah, I'm with you. I always get to the point where when the elite wide receivers are gone and now you're trying to make sense, okay, is this guy a top guy or what? That's when I start looking at some of the running backs. But I mean, the Jets are just so tough because it's going to be Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson. It doesn't matter who else. They're going to be the main targets for Aaron Rodgers. From the 314 guys, I'd like to know if I can't get one of the top defenses in fantasy, who's a sleeper defense that I can pick up. I don't know where they're ranking them, but one of my sneaky defenses, and I had them last year, and they were big for me, was the Detroit Lions. Because if you're talking about sacks, Aiden Hutchinson's going to put them up. Right now, they got Detroit ranked 13th.
I'm looking at their 15th, so that's a solid sleeper pick there.
They're going to put up sacks with Aiden Hutchinson. They upgraded their secondary. You hope that they could get some more picks this year, but I think that defense is one of those I always would go to.
Yeah, I like that one because you're right. They should be able to get to the quarterback now, or they will get to the quarterback. Another one that I kind of like, the problem, though, is I don't trust their secondary. So, there's a chance, they may get to the quarterback. The problem is they may also allow 30 points. Another sleeper, and I'm not saying, you should draft this team, if it's your last pick. I would just keep an eye on them throughout the season. Make that one selection. Maybe you go with Alex's Detroit Lions. And then as the season goes along, start to play the matchup game on the waiver wire with the defenses. I like the New York Giants just because of their front. Yeah. They've got Lawrence. They acquired Brian Burns. They've got Thibodeau. I love the kind of pass rush capability that they're going to have. So if they cause havoc on the quarterback, maybe you start to see some of those sack numbers go up. Maybe you start to see some fumbles that they are going to force. The problem, though, with them is going to be their secondary. Is their secondary going to be able to hold up? But you know what? If their defensive line can get to the quarterback fast enough, you know what that means? You don't have to blitz. You can drop more guys in coverage. The Giants, I'm not drafting them. They are a team, though, that I will be monitoring throughout the season to potentially pick up later on.
Yeah, stay the hell away from the Buffalo Bills defense. I know every year they're always one of those teams that you pick, but they lost Matt Milano yesterday. Like, I don't think that defense is going to be very good this year, so I'd say stay away from the Detroit Lions. A couple more of these on Fantasy Football Friday. From the 314, guys, keep Jordan Love since he was a top 6 QB, or keep Christian Kirk? I don't think there's even a question on this. You keep Jordan Love.
Yeah, I would keep Jordan Love as well. Christian Kirk, I mean, he should have a decent target share in Jacksonville now that, who was it that left? Ridley? Is that who I'm thinking of? Yeah. He should have a decent target share, but I just don't trust the Jacksonville Jaguars. Like, I'm not a fan of them. I would say you keep Jordan Love.
Yeah. By the way, DJ Patty Cakes up on our graveyard chat, chimed in on defense, and he brought up Atlanta. Atlanta made that big trade for Matthew Judon. Is that one of those defenses you should keep an eye on too, T-Bone?
They were interesting because they were a solid defense. I like that one. If it's late in the draft, you want to take a flyer on them.
They're ranked 29th.
The problem is like, even with Judon, I don't know if they get to the quarterback fast enough. And Judon is coming off of a major. I was reading on the trade yesterday or 2 days ago when it happened, and I liked it. The problem is he's A, coming off of injury, and B, last year prior to the injury, his like advanced metrics of like, was he winning in past situations? He wasn't. So they're a team I'd keep an eye on. I probably wouldn't draft them, but I do like it. I understand it.
314, guys, what do you think about Sam Laporta this year for the Lions? I think he's going to be a top 5 tight end by the end of the season. I think when you've got Amon-Ra St. Brown already, when you've got Jahmyr Gibbs, who's going to be a backfield option. Like, I think Sam Laporta is going to be used up, and I think he's going to be – I've seen a couple of fantasy drafts where he's going before guys like Mark Andrews. Like, he's going, like, right behind Travis Kelce in a couple of drafts.
Yeah, I would – if you're looking and you've got the chance and it's your first pick is with the tight end, or you're the first player that's going to take a tight end off the board, Laporta's the first pick for me. I think he's ahead of Travis Kelce. He's ahead of Mark Andrews. I just want to see it for Mark Andrews. Missed a lot of time last year due to injury.
Found that out.
Yeah, sorry, Grant. Travis Kelce, Kelce's still a really good tight end, but I think you're starting to see Kelce's kind of getting at that point where he has to pace himself a little bit more so he doesn't put up as big a regular season numbers, and then he just goes beast mode in the playoffs. Sam Laporta's the first tight end I'm taking off the board.
Let's end it with this one because this is a question that I've gotten from a few people. Guys, what are your thoughts on Nick Chubb this year? Any value, or should I try and grab him late? I've seen... Go ahead.
Coming from somebody that's had him the last 2 seasons, avoid him at all costs. Because going off of the Mark Andrews injury, Nick Chubb is always someone I lean on. It never goes well for me.
I've seen the average draft position for Nick Chubb being like in the 5th or 6th round. And, I mean, look, if you get Nick Chubb and he comes back and he's healthy the rest of the way, you're getting a top running back. But, 5th or 6th round for this dude who, if I'm not mistaken, T-Bone, he's not playing until week 6, right? Maybe?
Something like that. I don't know what exactly is his timetable, but I would take Nick Chubb later on in the draft. If you're looking at him, kind of, I don't know if I'd go second running back because you're going to probably place him to your point of if he misses time on IR. I would say that you end up taking Nick Chubb. I understand there's worries about his injury history and especially his explosiveness coming off of that major injury he suffered last year. I still think there's a ton of value in him. I would be willing to take him later on in the draft and see if you can bank on some of that value for later on in the season.
By the way, a lot of people are angry because I said Sam Laporta could be a top tight end at the end of the season, and he's already a top one. I've seen a few that he's the top guy. I've also seen a few that has Travis Kelce as the top guy. So it's like a 1-2 punch right now. I think he's going to be the best tight end by the end of the season in fantasy football, without question. That's our Fantasy Football Friday with Tanner Hendrickson and Graham Francis. I'm Alex Ferrario. Coming up next, you send us other questions, not fantasy football related. We'll get to those. You can ask us anything on the Air Comfort Service text line 314-399-9646. We'll get to that next year on BK and Ferrario on 101 ESPN.
got questions, we may have the answers. Maybe. It's BK and Ferrario's Questions and Answers.
Presented by Window World St. Louis.com. Simply the best for less.
314-399-9646 is our Air Comfort Service text line. Also up on our YouTube channel at 101 ESPN STL. We've got Tanner Hendrickson, we've got Graham Francis, and I'm Alex Ferrario. As it is time for Ask Us Anything. You send us a question of anything, we'll answer it here on 101 ESPN. Guys, let's start here from the 314. Who do you think, or why do you think the Cardinals believe that it makes sense to offer Paul Goldschmidt an extension?
Legacy player is the reason that I think they would do it.
Ticket sales?
Well, I don't even know if it's bad, because I don't think Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado are, what would be the word, are guys that are driving you to the ballpark now. Like, I feel like you're starting to see the fan base turn on Arenado. Maybe not all the way, but I think you're starting to see that. I think the reason that they would try and justify it if they did it, and I think it's the only reason they're even thinking about it, is potentially kind of what you said. Maybe it is a little bit of the ticket sales thing, but I think it would be they think he's a legacy player and they want to treat legacy players right. And, I think there's something to be said about that, but I just don't think Paul Goldschmidt's a legacy player. He started his career in Arizona. He spent more time in Arizona than he has in St. Louis. Yes, he did have the best personal accomplishment of his career here, winning an MVP, but I just don't view him as a guy that is a must-be brought back. And on top of that, he's part of the group that they had to bring in these quote-unquote leadership veterans because they didn't have enough leadership in the locker room already. So I don't know. I don't think they should. I can't even find a reason why you would bring him back.
Yeah, it's kind of where I'm at, too. I don't know if there's a reason to bring him back. There's no, farewell tour that you're trying to sell tickets for, and he hasn't played well, and you've got the replacement already within the team that can take over in Alec Burleson. So I'm not really sure what the selling point will be other than the fact that, we need his leadership around the team. But, man, could you even use that as a selling point now for how much this team has struggled over the last couple of years?
Yeah, no.
I don't really think so.
One thing that they could do, and this I would understand if they use him in this role. And because they're not doing it already, and they're even talking about how the reason Walker's not in the lineup is because they're platooning guys, which, again, doesn't make sense because Walker's not good against left-handed pitching in his career. He would have a role on a team. My guess is if he signs a contract next year, it's with anybody, it's probably in a platoon role because his numbers against right-handed pitching, 642 OPS, he's hitting 212 in terms of his batting average. That's 21% below league average. Against lefties, though, he's got a 783 OPS and is 20% above league average. So he has a role as a platoon. So if they said, we're bringing him back and we're going to platoon him and Alec Burleson at first base, I'd say, okay, if you stick with that, I can understand how you can kind of have that make sense. The problem is they're not showing a willingness to platoon him now, so why should I believe they would platoon him next year?
Alex,
and
real
you're
quick,
pay a ton of money for him, too.
Yeah, we talked about this earlier on the producer party, and Bazooka275 on the YouTube chat on the Graveyard brought this up. This is where Army would cut bait and not look back. We talked about this earlier, and I wanted to bring it up to you. One of the questions that I posed during the producers party was if Doug Armstrong controlled the Cardinals for the past 5 years and John Mozeliak controlled the Blues for the last 5 years, what would each team look like and would they be better?
Oh, to the point of Doug Armstrong cutting bait, Paul Goldschmidt's like David Backus territory. Now, Backus was a lot younger than Goldschmidt, but in terms of the career numbers, you could see it waning, and they said, nope, we're going to go a different direction, and they cut bait from it. I think if you were to present that scenario to me for just the way that both teams have been run, I think you would be seeing a lot more younger guys getting opportunities for the Cardinals. And I think you'd see you would see a lot of the veteran players if John Mozeliak was running the Blues still around. Now, that's a good thing for people. I think you'd still see guys like Alex Pietrangelo. I still think you'd see guys like David Perron and Vladimir Tarasenko. But I also don't believe you'd be seeing the young influx of players like you're seeing right now getting those opportunities. I don't know if Robert Thomas is playing your top line this year. I think it might be still Ryan O'Reilly, and Robert Thomas is playing second or third line role.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I actually think you're spot on with how Mo probably would have handled the Blues of, yeah, let's keep Alex Pietrangelo because we're not going to let the best defenseman walk. Let's keep a David Perron because we value leadership. The one that I just don't know is the Army with the Cardinals, because in theory it's easy to say, oh well, he would have traded Paul Goldschmidt last year at the deadline. He did that with Ryan O'Reilly. Thing is I think there's more ownership restrictions if you run the Cardinals than there is the Blues. Like, I think Tom Stillman, he would tell you, like, hey, no, we're not going to pull off this move if he doesn't think it makes sense. Like, if they were contending, for example, and they said, well, you know what, we're going to make the playoffs, but let's trade Ryan O'Reilly. We could get value for him. He wouldn't do that. But I think when you look at Tom Stillman with the St. Louis Blues, he's more willing to say, okay, I'm going to let my manager manage. He's got a salary cap. He can go up to it if he wants. He can go to the floor if he wants. But I'm going to let him do his thing. I think with the Cardinals and their ownership group, I think there is a little bit of, okay, we still want to have these legacy players. We want to have these guys that are the quote-unquote stars. So even if you saw the last year's show, there was a decline coming for Paul Goldschmidt, or he had declined, so had Nolan Arenado. I think the Cardinals, and as much as Mo decided this last year, and I think ownership decided this last year, would much rather hold on to those guys than trade them, thinking that they bounce back and you still have the superstars.
I mean, you're not wrong. Like, we talk so much about the GMs and the Pobos, but the ownership, like Tom Stillman basically told Doug Armstrong, you could spend to the cap if it makes sense. And guess what? If they get both of these guys in the offer sheets, they're spending to the cap again. But it makes sense. They're 22-year-old players. Mo operates under two guys that are telling him how to operate. Just like the money in, money out at the trade deadline, Mo's got to operate that way. So, I mean, I think you guys are spot on with it.
And I will say this kind of as a counter to my point that I just made, because me and BK were talking about this off air. I think it was on Wednesday. I can't remember. We say, well, none of the philosophy of the Cardinals would change because of the ownership group. You may change the Pobo in 2 years, but you're not going to change the ownership group. The one thing I would say is I don't know how much philosophy is actually from ownership, because it's kind of the thing that we've talked about with the Colorado Rockies and how they build their team. Everybody says, well, you can't build a team in Colorado because of the altitude problem. There's no way to build a winning team in Colorado. Well, we don't really know because it's only been one group that's ever done it. So we don't have a sample size, And it's kind of the same thing with Mo and the Cardinals and how their philosophy would work. Is it a ownership thing? It's quite possible that if you bring in Heimblum or you bring in somebody from outside the organization, they run a lot of the same way. But we don't know until that occurs, because maybe it is a Mo thing, or maybe it is ownership is actually tying what he's able to do. It's going to be a fascinating case study when John Mozeliak ends up stepping down, retiring, whatever he ends up doing as the Cardinals Pobo is what they'll do in their new philosophy.
Well, and that's what I want to get to next, because Randy Carricker said something today on the opening drive that honestly kind of piqued my interest, and I think Tanner was thinking about this too prior to hearing Randy say it. Should the Cardinals already be done with 2024 and start focusing on 2025? We'll discuss that. And if we're talking 2025, what does the outfield look like long term? All of that coming up next here on BK and Ferrario on 101 ESPN.
we have to give our fans hope. Well, I'm a fan. I'm a big fan. You know what? My hope for 2024 is gone. Let's start being logical. Let's be realistic about this situation. I would be more excited about seeing Walker play. I would be more excited about, and we can wait until September. I'd be more excited about seeing Michael McGreevy get an opportunity to start a game here or there. I want to keep Pallante in the rotation. I know that I'm going to have some guys. I know Gray's going to be back. I know Mikolas is going to be back. I know that Fetty's going to be back next year. But why not have some auditions for young guys?
So that was Randy Carricker from the opening drive earlier today, and we want to hear from you on this. Send us your mic drops over on the 101 ESPN app. If the Cardinals should already be focused on 2025 and not so much about the rest of this season. And I have a feeling we're going to have a mixed bag on this because, yes, there are a lot of people. If you look at the graveyard in our Air Comfort Service text line, I think a lot of people are done with this Cardinals team and would much rather see the Cardinals focusing on 2025, but you are only 4 games back. Sure, you do have to worry about 4 other teams fighting for one playoff spot, but you are 4 games back. And, man, what a message that would send. Even if we all believe that they stink, that the Cardinals just say, well, we're not really going to focus on the playoffs anymore. We're going to start getting these guys some options here. But I do think there's a way, T-Bone, to mix both. I do think there's a way to mix competing for a playoff spot still with the optimism of 4 games out, but also focusing on 2025. And it's not on the pitching side. I would disagree with Randy on that front because I don't think McGreevy and Graceffo give you a better shot of getting into the playoffs than Andre Pallante, than Sonny Gray, than Kyle Gibson and Eric Fetty. And like it or not, those guys are a part of your team next year, with the exception of maybe they make some big-time moves. But where I do agree with Randy is where we probably have all been over these last couple of weeks. You should be focused on 2025 with your position players playing right now. They should be in the fight for a playoff spot rather than seeing guys like Tommy Pham getting opportunities. And look, I love Tommy Pham, but I don't know if Tommy Pham playing in the outfield consistently gives you the perfect shot of getting into the playoffs, but also worried about 2025 while Jordan Walker is sitting on the bench. Like, if I look at this roster right now, as much as I love the fact that you've got certain players that have that pedigree of winning mentality, my outfield would consist of Lars Nootbaar, Victor Scott, and Jordan Walker, and it would be kind of a set-it-and-forget-it situation. I would be seeing more playing time for Nolan Gorman at second base, even if he has been abysmal. And Brendan Donovan would be used as a utility guy. Ivan Herrera would be up with this team right now as the second catcher and a bat that can be used off of the bench. Those types of moves, I agree with Randy. You need to focus on 2025 and compete for 2024 because, like it or not, these guys are going to be competing for the playoffs in 2025. And if they're not getting the reps now, what makes you think they're going to be ready to go next year?
So I would still be focusing on 2024. Now, with that being said, I would still be playing Jordan Walker, by the way. Like, I think it's ridiculous he's not in the lineup now that he's up here against right-handed pitching because Lars Nootbaar's not providing you anything right now and has really been struggling. I still think you should be playing for 2024 still. I'm not willing to just wave the white flag and say that the season is over because I don't think the National League is all that good. And I still believe that you can make the playoffs, and I think October baseball is meaningful for the St. Louis Cardinals. Now, do they have to go 25-16 the rest of the way, which includes a gauntlet of a schedule with 22 straight against playoff teams right now? Absolutely. And that's a tough task, but I still want to play for that right now. I still want to try and put out the best lineup. And the reason for that is I just don't know if there's a lot of young guys that I'm like super excited about that I think you have to get up here and wave the white flag right now. Like, who would that be? Like, to me, Jordan Walker, he's kind of a different conversation because he's on the big league roster. I think it's ridiculous he's not playing when you should still be pushing for 2024. But, like, Thomas Ajacey, do you really feel like you have to get him playing time to try and prepare him for 2025? I don't know. McGreevy and Graceffo, it's clear the Cardinals don't see something in those guys, and they've got reinforcements coming in their pitching right now. So there's no real roster spot for them. I would much rather be pushing still for the playoffs in 2024. I don't think the Cardinals should be waving the white flag, even though it feels like the season is lost already, that they're not going to make the playoffs. I don't think you give up yet. We can have a different conversation if they start this stretch. Let's say they go like 4-9 in their next 13. Now I'm more willing to have the conversation. Now I'm more willing to wave the white flag. I'm just not at that point yet.
I'm with you, too. Like, September is what we're talking about right now. And I do think the Cardinals probably get to that point in September if they should start focusing on that. But there are certain players that I don't believe is waving the white flag, putting them in the lineup. Like, Jordan Walker in the lineup is not waving the white flag. Not any more than playing Lars Nootbaar in the lineup consistently or any of these other outfielders that you have right now. I don't believe putting Nolan Gorman in the lineup is waving the white flag. Yes, Brendan Donovan is playing second base, and Brendan Donovan is a very competitive and good player, but Nolan Gorman is supposed to be this difference maker for you from the left side, and he's coming off of the bench or not playing very often. Those types of players, at times, I can make the argument Alec Burleson should be playing first base and getting 4 at-bats regularly than Paul Goldschmidt. Pedro Paje should not be seeing playing time in this stretch of games because you feel like his defense and his ability to catch pitchers is better. Ivan Herrera should be the other guy, with Wilson Contreras getting a bulk of those. Those are the types of moves that I look at and I say, that's not waving the white flag, because not only are you giving yourself at least a shot with these players in the lineup against the Dodgers, the Brewers, the Twins, the Padres, the Yankees, but I'm doing a little bit of both. I'm double dipping here, and I'm getting the opportunity to see them in these competitive matchups so I have an idea of what this is going to look like beyond this season. Because let's say you do go 4-9 down the stretch, and you go into the month of September out of it, and you start playing these guys. Okay, well, you got nothing to play for. And if those guys start coming through, you know what would worry me, T-Bone? Those guys are coming through in a moment that doesn't matter as much as it would when you're taking on the Dodgers, Brewers, Twins, and Padres.
Yeah, and again, like, I think if you look at like last year when they had Mason Wynn at the AAA level, it would be more of a conversation at this point in the season where it was, okay, should they be calling up Mason Wynn to get him playing time? Problem is, as I look at like their AAA level and the guys that we're talking about that should play are going to get a bulk of the playing time now. So why would I not want to just push for the playoffs? Like, the only guy that they got in AAA that is worth bringing up is probably Ivan Herrera. I would agree with that. Again, I've said that they've managed the roster wrong. He should be up here with the big league club right now. And Thomas Saggese, which again, I've argued should be up here right now, helping them push. The reason that frustrates me about, well, should they wave the white flag and bring up the younger kids? Well, they should be bringing up Herrera and Thomas Saggese to help them push for the playoffs, because it would actually maximize their roster. And instead, they're not doing that, which is what frustrates the hell out of me. So I still think you push, because I do believe that October baseball is meaningful. Do I think this team has any shot once they get to October? If I'm being honest, no. I don't think they've got the pitching to do it. But I do think it would be meaningful to see some of these younger guys in October, to get a Lars Nootbaar October reps again. He hasn't had that since 2022. Jordan Walker, it would be his first playoff experience. It would be Mason Wynn's first playoff experience. I believe it would be Alec Burleson's first playoff experience, because I don't think he was on the active roster for the playoffs in 2022. That kind of stuff is meaningful. So, yes, I still believe you should push. I don't think you've got enough young talent at AAA that I think you, A, should bring up here and rush, and B, that is worth waving the white flag on this season.
So we do want your mic drops. We'll get to these at 12:30, so please keep sending them in, because we got Daniel Nugent-Bowman on the other side. But before we go, T-Bone, I do want to play Jeff's mic drop.
Absolutely, I want to see the Cardinals go to the future in 2025. I truly believe Luken Baker needs a chance. I know he had a short stint last year and didn't do too well, but then again, who does, period? I'd love to see Thomas Saggese up here, as well as some of the younger pitchers, period. I am not looking forward to this next 22 games. Unfortunately, if we got in a hot streak, then things will remain the same going forward.
Yeah, and I think Jeff is probably where a lot of Cardinals fans lie. And again, we want your mic drops over on the 101 ESPN app. I agree with the Thomas Saggese one, T-Bone, but again, you asked the question, where's he going to play, which I think is a very fair question, because he's infield for you. And right now you're talking Donovan and Gorman, unless you're sitting Nolan Arenado at third so that you can get Gorman over there and Saggese at second. But I don't think that makes any sense. I'm not on board with the Luken Baker one, because I don't think Luken Baker plays into this team's future, nor am I on board yet about the pitchers. When we get to September, when you're 10 games out of 500, then we can talk pitchers.
I don't necessarily mind if you wanted to call up Luken Baker. The problem is he's so positionalist. But
he's a bench bat.
The reason I would bring that up is Could you not start him at DH when you go up against a lefty and just see what it looks like when you're down the stretch? Because Alec Burleson, who's probably your starting first baseman next year, is not good against lefties. Odds are you probably need somebody that's going to platoon with him at first base. Is that Luken Baker? I know he's kind of positionless, but they've got a couple guys on the roster that are positionless. They had Matt Carpenter that was positionless. Brandon Crawford, essentially positionless. He kind of is just a shortstop for the St. Louis Cardinals. I don't mind bringing him up. I would wait until you really fall out of the, like, he's not a guy that I'm saying, oh, we have to bring him up, we have to wave the white flag, we have to really see what we have, because it's clear the Cardinals just don't view him as a big leaguer, and I don't know from the it was a small sample size, but from what we saw last year, I'm kind of in agreement with the Cardinals.
He's Tanner Hendrickson, Graham Francis. I'm Alex Ferrario. We'll get to your mic drops. If you believe the Cardinals should focus on 2025 and wave the white flag on 2024, we'll get to those mic drops on the other side of the interview that we have coming up next with Daniel Nugent-Bowman. He's the Oilers insider for The Athletic. He collaborated with JR on a piece talking about these offer sheets. He joins us next here on 101 ESPN.
They are St. Louis. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN.
Along with Tanner Hendrickson and Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. We are trying to get a hold of Daniel Nugent-Bowman, the Oilers insider for The Athletic. Hopefully we'll get a hold of him to get his thoughts on kind of where the Blues are at with this offer sheet, where the Oilers are at with this offer sheet. I was just reading his piece from earlier today talking about did Ken Holland, the former GM, put them in this position of not signing them to a contract extension, earlier in the season. And I agree with what he's saying to the point of, look, Edmonton had no reason to give these guys a contract extension, nor were they going to accept a contract extension. And that's the other factor into all of this. Yes, they would be under contract, and you're the Oilers' property, and like T-Bone believes more than anything, you're under contract, so you're going to play. But Philip Broberg wanted out back in December, and they put him in the minors so that they could build a stock up, and they couldn't find a trade at the trade deadline. Dylan Holloway is not going to be playing in the top 6 for this team, mostly because they have other players that they signed for free agency. So do yourself a favor and head over to The Athletic and check out Daniel Nugent-Bowman's piece talking about the Oilers and how they got into this position. And he is joining us now, the Oilers insider for The Athletic, who collaborated with Jeremy Rutherford of these offer sheets that the Blues handed out to Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway. Daniel, thank you so much for hopping on. I know it's a vacation time off season right now, but I guess Doug Armstrong decided to put you guys back to work.
Yeah, you're welcome. I am on vacation, but this story kind of warranted a big enough, was big enough, I should say, to hop back on. So, yeah, you don't see offer sheets too many times in the NHL, and then 2 by one team against another it's a pretty darn big story. So here we are.
So, Daniel, let's start there, because I really did love the piece talking about, how the Oilers got into this position. And, a lot of people in Edmonton are upset that the deal wasn't done prior to this. But it seemed like something that Edmonton was kind of forced into doing, mostly for the usage of these 2 young players.
Yeah, I mean, it would be maybe a stretch to say that Broberg and Holloway have been misused by this organization. That might be putting it a bit too far. But there have been a lot of times where they've have been put in situations that haven't been particularly great. Dylan Holloway's had a lot of injuries in his pro career, some very bad ones that he's had to kind of work through. Philip Broberg's had them as well. But yeah, I would say, they certainly could have been handled a lot better by the organization. I mean, Holloway, we'll start with him. He's a guy that the past coach, Jay Woodcroft, had a very short leash on. And I mean, he started not this past season, but the one before. He was, had an amazing training camp, won a job in camp, was put on the top 6. And he turned over a puck in the first period of the first game and never got back there. The leash was very short on this player. He played a lot of time in the bottom 6, almost exclusively for the past 2 seasons, and then really started to make waves in the playoffs. Even this year, he missed two months with a broken kneecap. Goes down to Bakersfield, and they want to try him at center for a few games. They're thinking he could be a bottom 6 center for this team this season, and they immediately put him back on the wing. There's just no real cohesive plan. Same with Philip Broberg. Mark Stewart, the assistant coach, the longtime former NHL defenseman, went over to Stockholm, to Sweden last summer, showed him a bunch of clips of him playing the right side and said, you're going to be our right side defenseman. What did they do? The goal was to put him into, on the second pair with Matthias Ekholm, a fellow countryman, really groom him there. Ekholm gets hurt in training camp, or I should say a captain skate. Never plays in training camp. Misses the first game of the year. They lose 8-1 in Vancouver. That plan is completely. They stop that plan. They don't go back to it. It's never revived. And Broberg's back to being the 7th defenseman. And so. It got to the point last year where Broberg wanted out of Edmonton, right? So we're in December. He eventually goes back to the minors, and they're like, "You're going to play your normal left side. This is how you're going to develop." Where is he in the Stanley Cup final? He's on his right side. So they never had a right plan for this guy, for either guy, but especially Broberg. And with Broberg got to the point where he was pretty frustrated with the situation last year. And when somebody offers you $4.5 million versus, I don't know exactly what the Oilers were offering him, but given the cap circumstance, and they thought they could really strong arm him with him being an RFA, it was nowhere near that amount. And it was more opportunity for him in St. Louis. It's a perfect opportunity, especially for both players, but Broberg as well. So again, I would say used is the wrong word, but close to it. And the Oilers have a little bit to blame in terms of themselves for the situation, for sure.
And Daniel, how much of it is kind of organization failure just based on, Ken Holland walks away at the end of the season. They don't have a GM in place, so they go to their acting GM and Jeff Jackson as free agency starts, and they don't name a GM till later on. How much different does that look if they have a plan in place?
I don't know. It's a fair question. It's a good question. I'll say Jeff Jackson was absolutely lauded for his work on free agent day. I mean, he brought back the vast majority of this crew that got to the Stanley Cup final and added two very good veteran forwards in Victor Arvidsson and Jeff Skinner on really sweetheart deals for this team. So I think they just assumed, as this organization has done for many years, this is their time to really strong arm young players, as a lot of teams do, right? Like, you typically offer sheets aren't a big thing in this league. They kind of work to the idea that, hey, players are going to want to come back here. They're going to want to be part of a team that is on the cusp of winning and got to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup final. And, it didn't work out in this case, right? Like, money talks, and as we talked about with the circumstances around these two players, like, there's definitely be a lot more opportunity for Dylan Holloway in St. Louis. And I think there will be for Broberg as well, even though they were kind of working him into almost the top four, and that was probably going to be the case for him, and it could be if he comes back, if the Oilers decide to match. So, I don't think having Jeff Jackson run the team, kind of changed or made that situation happen per se. I think it was just an organizational thought that, hey, we're going to augment this team the best we can because it's time to win now. And they didn't really consider two of their two young core players that had really Broberg and Holloway are the only two players on this team with growth potential. You can maybe touch on Evan Bouchard, although this guy got into the Norris conversation last year. But those are the two players on this roster that have any real sense that he can grow and be better players. Everyone else is a very old team. And if they lose these two players, that is not bode very well for their future.
We're talking with Daniel Nugent-Bowman, who covers the Oilers for The Athletic. You could check him out on Twitter at DNB Sports. And, Daniel, I know what I'm about to ask you is tough because it's a little bit of speculating, and I want to make sure that people know that's what this is. But we've gone through almost every scenario of kind of what could take place of if this deal gets matched by the Oilers, if one does, if neither do. I think the outcome that I've come to is I really wonder if Stan Bowman and company believe that those draft pick compensations might be beneficial for the team rather than paying the salary of these guys. But where do you fall in terms of what you think realistically could be the outcome with this?
It's tough. There's a lot kind of going on here. One real wild card here is the health of Evander Kane. And it's now believed that he will start the season on long-term injury. But how long? If he isn't on LTIR for the entire season, then that creates if he goes on but he's not on for the whole year, they have to clear room for him to get back. So it's almost like you have to treat him as being part of the team, right? So, but if he can't play the full year, you have a bit of flexibility there. Cody Cece's the guy, the defenseman that's kind of would be in the crosshairs if they bring back both players, and probably if they bring back just Broberg. Holloway, I mean, with the salary being half of what Broberg's is the cap hit, they might have a little bit more leeway and flexibility, but it's really tough to know here. For all of it, what I've talked about with Broberg, they like assistant coach Paul Coffey really likes this guy. They kind of saw in those last 10 games of the playoff run, and into Game 7, like this guy's playing basically next to Darnell Nurse on the second pair. So I don't think they want to lose this guy. And you talk about the draft pick compensation. Like, yeah, this team is devoid of prospects. They lack picks. But they're not getting a first-round pick for either player out of this. They're getting a second-rounder. They're getting a third-rounder. So that's, for players that both were picked in the first round, they've spent 5 years with Philip Broberg, although 2 he spent in Sweden, and 4 years with Dylan Holloway. that's a lot of time and energy to be, using on developing players that are now starting to come into their own for a second and a third round pick. So the situation's pretty tough. I really don't know. I tend to think they're more at this point inclined to match on Holloway and let Broberg walk, and Broberg would get them the second. But it kind of depends on Evander Kane. It depends on if they can muster up a trade for Cody Ceci and keep which would allow them to better keep Philip Broberg.
And Daniel, final question for me. You had mentioned that these are like the two young guys on the roster for the Edmonton Oilers, and Broberg and Holloway, and that you can look at them and say they still have room to grow. I want to look at Broberg. You mentioned his playoff run and the success he had in the Stanley Cup playoffs. What do you think the ceiling is for him when he does fully develop as a defenseman here at the NHL level?
Yeah, it's a tough one. Yeah, he is starting to come into his own. There were some kind of warts, I would say, in his game in the early part of his pro career that he's starting to iron out. Defensive reads, not the greatest passer. I think he's improved that a fair bit. His real strength is being able to skate the puck out of danger. This guy can skate very well. I don't think he'll ever be a power play quarterback. Certainly as a first unit guy, I think he can play on the second unit. They had him in all situations in the minors. Didn't really use them in a penalty kill role in the playoffs, but that's a lot to throw a young defenseman into who's just kind of getting his feet wet, really. But I think there's penalty killing abilities there. I think he's a nice, well-rounded player. I know some people in the organization thought he could be a top-pairing guy. That is not going to happen here in Edmonton for the time being with Ekholm and Bouchard there. But I know some people in the organization that think he could be a top pairing guy. I know some that think he's got, and other people outside the organization, that think he's kind of more set in that second pair role. It's a 3-4. I think you're getting safely getting a top four defenseman. Who, I think is again starting to come into his own and has some abilities to grow his game. He and Holloway, like I said, they were the two young guys on the team that had the ability to kind of add layers to their game and become better players. Really, it's the next guy who's Evan Bouchard who's showing that, and I think I stand to be corrected, but I think the next two youngest guys are McDavid and Draisaitl, who are in their late 20s. So it just shows how old this team is, right? And to lose two guys like that, or even one, would be a tough pill for this organization as well.
Yep. Absolutely. Daniel, hey, man, I really appreciate you hopping on in the middle of the offseason, but I know obviously things are swirling around right now up in Edmonton, so thanks for taking some time. People can follow you over on The Athletic and on Twitter at DNB Sports. Enjoy the rest of your offseason, my man, and we'll talk to you once the season kicks in.
All right. Thanks so much. It's a pleasure being on with you guys. Sorry for missing the first minute there.
No, you're fine. Not a problem at all. Thanks, Daniel Nugent-Bowman, once again joining us from The Athletic. I apparently had a brain fart there, which that's just the coffee wearing off. I got to go get another cup. But a couple of things I do want to react to, T-Bone, before we get on the other side. And we'll get to your mic drops because I know a lot more are coming in of the Cardinals waving the white flag for 2024. But what he just said there at the end, and it was a great question by you, I think is the most important part. You're getting, without question, a top four pair defenseman. With the opportunity, and he said it, people in Edmonton believe this, with the opportunity of being a top pair defenseman. And this is why when we talked about it earlier today on the show, it expedites this retool. And it's a genius move by Doug Armstrong because I agree with Daniel. I feel more inclined that they're going to match the offer of Dylan Holloway than move on from a Philip Broberg because you're going to have to attach a pick to move on from Cody Ceci. And remember, Philip Broberg did not want to be in Edmonton. And if he's not getting a top four role and they're going to use him on his offside, you think he's going to sign a contract and stay there in 2 years? Not unless you're overpaying for it. So he sounds so much like Jay Bouwmeester, and I know BK brought that up with Mark Spector on Wednesday. But I want people to understand this. At the trade deadline, the speculation was the Blues offered Pavel Buchnevich to Edmonton for Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway. And the Edmonton Oilers said, nope, that's not enough. We need more than this. They tried to trade Philip Broberg, and nobody would pay the price that Edmonton was asking. So if they think that they can keep Philip Broberg and then flip him in the offseason next year, you're not getting the equivalent of what you deem matching of a second-round pick for Philip Broberg because he's not going to be playing top 4 minutes. He's going to be playing on the third pair. So I am more excited now hearing Daniel talk about Philip Broberg than I was prior because you might realistically be trading a second-round draft pick for a dude who has top pair potential. This is what everybody was asking for around the St. Louis Blues, of finding a guy that has this potential, and you might have fallen into it by an ingenious move by Doug Armstrong.
Yeah, the reason I asked that was because I was curious if he thought the same thing that we talked about earlier, because he would know the Oilers side of things. And you're right. He said the Oilers, some in the organization thought he had the potential to be top pair. And again, like, if he doesn't become that and he just settles in as a second pair defenseman, that's a win for the St. Louis Blues. You got him at $4 million. You sent out a second round pick. It's an ingenious move by Doug Armstrong, and he forced the hands of the Edmonton Oilers. And you hope you end up getting that high ceiling. You hit that upside of, hey, this guy ends up becoming that guy that we can pair with Colton Parayko long term. And to me, that's what will settle if when the St. Louis Blues exit the retool, is when they've finally gotten somebody that they can say, boom, there's our shutdown pairing again. We've got it. It's Colton Parayko on the right side. It's potentially Philip Broberg on the left side. And that's what they've been desperately looking for over the last couple of off seasons.
Man, I keep hoping that this is the one that actually happens for the Blues, because that fills the biggest void. And I think if you're a Blues fan, you get excited of what the future looks like for your top 4 defense with guys like Kessel, Jiricek, Broberg, and Theo Lindstein. That's a really good top 4 that you might have in the future for the St. Louis Blues team. Again, Daniel Nugent-Bowman, if you missed anything from that conversation about the Blues and where it stands with the Oilers, you can check it out after the show today on our podcast page, 101ESPN.com, and wherever you get your podcasts from, always presented by Dobbs Tire and Auto Centers. We got more mic drops coming in from our previous segment of should the Blues be waving the white flag on 2024 and focused on 2025? We'll get to more of those mic drops on the other side next year on BK and Ferrario on 101 ESPN.
Grant Francis here with a Sports Center update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. Cardinals are back in action today after a day off yesterday as they welcome in the LA Dodgers following their sweep by the Cincinnati Reds in that 3-game set earlier this week. Cardinals are now 60-61 on the season, hoping to get back to 500 with a win tonight. It'll be a tough matchup, though, as they're going up against the Dodgers, who just got back from a 4-game series in Milwaukee. They split that series 2 games apiece, but they're coming off back-to-back losses out of that series, and they'll get Miles Mikolas in the first game of this one tonight. First pitch from Busch Stadium will be at 7:15. I'm Grant Francis. The Sports Center update's been driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. See them at londoff.com. Chevy, together we drive. Are you kidding me?
Along with Tanner Hendrickson and Grant Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. So we were talking at the top of this hour of a comment that Randy Carricker had earlier today on the opening drive of, look, this season seems like it might be dead now. Even though you're still 4 games out of a playoff spot, you have a stretch of 22 games coming up where you take on the Dodgers, the Brewers, the Twins, the Padres, the Yankees, and the Brewers once again. And you're fighting with the Reds, the Giants, the Mets, and the Braves all for that last playoff spot because Milwaukee, unless you go out there and sweep Milwaukee both times, seems like it's pretty much out of reach. And we posed the question that Randy posed of, do the Cardinals look at 2024 as a lost option and just go look at 2025 now? What we mean by that is bringing up some of these younger players, Sajasi, some of the pitchers like McGreevy, Graceffo in the minor leagues, and play them over the veterans that you've been relying on that have put you in this 1 game below 500 mark. So we'll get to your mic drops in just a bit. But, T-Bone, one other thing I wanted to mention was something I saw on our Air Comfort Service text line saying that if you decide to wave the white flag 2 weeks after the trade deadline, then you massively failed because you missed out on gaining some really nice prospects for a guy like Ryan Helsley. And that is something that you do have to take into consideration. Like, it's hard to say one thing at the trade deadline, although the Eric Fetty thing just fell into your lap of getting them for Tommy Edman, and that was essentially it. It is a hard thing to sell your fan base on of the direction this team is going, that 2 weeks after what you could have gotten was a haul for Ryan Helsley, you opted to buy, and now you're starting to just wave the white flag.
Yeah, see, I understand that because they would have gotten a pretty good haul for Ryan Helsley because he would have had 2 postseason runs for whatever team ended up acquiring him. If they want to flip Ryan Helsley in the offseason, they're still going to get a pretty good haul for him because he is one of the best relievers in all of baseball. I don't mind the route that they ended up going. They were in a position, I think they were in a playoff spot on the trade deadline, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, they were.
So I understand some fans will say, well, we never really believed in the team. Look at the run differential. But to me, I don't think it's a good message to send to your fan base if you're going to sell while you're sitting in a playoff spot. They should have been buyers at the trade deadline. Now, if you wanted to argue they should have done a little bit more instead of just doing money in, money out, I'm totally here to listen to that argument. But I don't mind the idea of that they kept Ryan Helsley. And sure, did they miss out on an opportunity to potentially capitalize? Sure. But if they want to make that move again in the offseason, if they look to kind of cut payroll, I'm telling you right now, Ryan Helsley's going to be the first name that a lot of teams are calling about because he is such a dominant closer.
And the key will be that you do that in the offseason and don't hold on to it for a year too long and say, well, let's go 1 more year and we'll trade him at the deadline, and then he doesn't pan out and then things fall apart. So it's making the right decisions there. All right, let's get to your mic drops. I think we've got a big load of them, so let's start with Matthew.
Listen, I want the Cardinals to make the playoffs.
Attaboy.
I understand what can happen when you make the playoffs. But at the same time, I really feel like it will almost hurt them more in the long run if they squeak in, because then they feel like they're closer than what they actually are to competing. You know, if they squeak in, they can use that as a crutch, saying, oh, look, we made the playoffs, so we're not that far off. When the reality is, I think they are far off. Their rotation isn't good enough. Their bullpen's not good enough. Their lineup isn't good enough. Their minor league system isn't good enough. I don't know that they need a complete overhaul and need to rebuild for the next 5 to 7 years, but they do need more than just incremental changes. And I think if you just barely squeak in, it's going to put this facade up that maybe tells them that incremental changes are all they need to do. And that's just not the reality. they need some pretty drastic changes. I think they can be made, but I'm not the one calling the shots. So if they make the playoffs, I'm going to root for them. Anything can happen when you make the playoffs. I do understand that. But for the long-term health of the franchise, I personally think that not making it and maybe having that realization of how far off they are might be what's best for them.
I think context is important here, T-Bone, because squeaking in can mean a couple of different things. Because I agree with him in the sense that if you just are gifted the third wild card spot and you go 500 the rest of the way, but all of the other teams around you just fall face first on the ground and you're a playoff team, that I can understand where he's coming from, because then the Cardinals will say, well, we were a playoff team last year. That's improvement from where we were the year prior, but we all know you were gifted it. But if you squeak in the sense of, well, you performed well down the stretch and these other teams fall apart and you do get in with 84, 85 wins, I guess that really comes down to how it looks. Did your offense come through? Because he's right. Your pitching isn't set up for the future, but you're waiting on a lot of guys in the minor leagues right now to get to that point. Tink Hence, Quinn Matthews, Cooper Jerpy, players like that. It's the offense, and does that perform well down the stretch? That's to the point where it would at least give you some optimism.
Yeah, I get what Matthew's saying, and I think it's totally fair to wonder what the organization would do if they end up kind of squeaking into the playoffs. If they get that third wild card, they would call it a success because it's clear they view success as making the playoffs. I don't even think it's so much winning the division anymore. It's just, do we get to October? I guess my only kind of counter to it would be, do you think the Cardinals would change even if they missed the playoffs? Because I'm skeptical to know, like, last year was the year for the big sweeping changes, right? It was, okay, well, they need to go out and add 3 starting pitchers, so they need to add swing and miss. They need to really overhaul everything in the way that they view pitching, and, like, they didn't do it. And if they weren't going to do it last year, coming off of a 91-loss season, I don't know if missing the playoffs necessarily this year is actually going to change their mindset at all. Maybe it does. Maybe back-to-back years is what is the tipping point, and Matthew's onto something there. But I just don't think that there's anything that's really going to change the way that they operate in the offseason to really fix things.
Yeah, nothing's going to change the way that the Cardinals go unless they make, like, significant changes. But, I mean, let's be honest here. The Cardinals picked 7th overall this draft, and they went about it the same way. In fact, they added to the roster this offseason. So, like, it's hard to imagine another year of missing the playoffs or even squeaking in is going to make that drastic of changes for the Cardinals. Let's hear from Lloyd.
Yeah, we absolutely should be looking to 2025. We should have looked there last year at the All-Star break when we should have fired Marmol, cleaned house, and wisely did a rebuild. Fans would have understood. I think the team would have understood while people still had value. But no, instead, we piddled around, and here we are. We are going to end this season in the exact same spot, whether we try or not, as we were last year. Whatever.
Whatever. I like the way that he ended that one. You could tell he's a frustrated fan right now. I mean, the hard part is, like, we were excited in the offseason. Like, I'm not going to lie here and say that we weren't excited when they got Sonny Gray. Were we excited about Kyle Gibson and Lance Lynn? No, but those guys performed better than we thought they were going to. I was excited the fact that they went out there and got Keenan Middleton and Andrew Kittredge, even though we haven't seen Keenan Middleton. Like, you can't deny the excitement that you had. And they did focus on 2024 last year when they waved the white flag. You saw more of Mason Wynn. You saw more of Nolan Gorman. You saw more of Lars Nootbaar. Like, you saw some of these guys get opportunities. I think the real question you're asking here is, when you wave the white flag for 2025, what does that look like? Because you're not going to see Tink Hence and Quinn Matthews up here. You're not going to see McGreevy or Graceffo up here, because who's sitting? I mean, you're not going to take Gray out of the rotation. You're not going to take Pallante. In fact, you need more of Pallante. Are you taking Kyle Gibson, Miles Mikolas out? Like, those guys are here next year. Unless you find a way to make some type of trade, they're all here. So I think the part that I argue with myself, as much as I want to see these guys, I think it's you have to understand who you're trying to see, because there's only certain guys that you're going to get a chance to watch.
Yeah, I understand what he's saying, and, you know, I think there's a decent argument to be had now that we now know what happened of Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado. I'm not going to talk out both sides of my mouth and say, yeah, they should have torn it down at the All-Star break last year, because there was a legitimate argument that they should trade Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado and not bank on Goldie, who's 36 or 37, of having a bounce-back year. Because remember, it was a down year for both of those guys last year. Not as bad as it was this year, but it was a down year. I think you either came out of, okay, last year was kind of the one-off. They just didn't have enough pitching, to where if you marginally upgrade that, like the Cardinals did, the offense will be able to play the way it did prior until the trade deadline. Because prior to the trade deadline last year, most of the offensive pieces were healthy for the Cardinals, and they were a top 10 offense. If you believe they were going to get back to that, like I did, then I think you decide not to trade Goldschmidt and Arenado, because that is kind of going into a retool or rebuild, whatever you want to call it. But if you're on the side of Lloyd there, I understand what you're saying of, yes, you should have been seeing that these guys that were in their 30s could potentially just fall off of a cliff. We've talked about it. When it goes for veteran players, it goes like that, and it may never come back. So you just come out on one end or the other. I was on the side of, hey, they should push again, see if it was a one-off. If you fix your pitching staff, you've probably got a chance to make the playoffs. Problem is I didn't foresee this version of the offense. If you did, hey, credit to you. You're right. They should have then torn it down. If you thought Goldie and Arenado were going to, whether decline this bad as it has been this season or just continue to be on the decline, then yes, they should have tried to capitalize on those guys at last year's trade deadline, along with Jack Flaherty and all the other pieces that they sold.
Let's try and roll through a couple more of these before we got to get to the junk drawer. And if we have more mic drops, we'll get to those in the 1 o'clock hour. Let's hear from Connor.
This team should have been playing for 2025 by the trade deadline. They need to call up all the young guys, give them a chance. I'm done with Goldie. I'm done with Arenado. I'm done with this pretty much whole pitching staff. The front office doesn't have a clue what the heck they're doing. So honestly, even if they called up the young guys, I'm sure they'd screw it up by not playing them. So it doesn't really matter what route they go. The season's a wash, just like last year. This franchise is going in the wrong direction and has been for the last decade. And until Mo is gone, and honestly, maybe even the DeWitts, I don't see it changing.
Let's hear from Steven.
There's some things about the expanded playoffs I like and some things I don't. Yeah, it's cool that more teams are in contention this late in the year. But unfortunately, for a franchise that's run like the St. Louis Cardinals are, to where they might add a marquee name and then try to build around it when they haven't been successful in developing their own talent for years now, is a real problem if the Cardinals are hanging around, say, 1 or 2 or 3 games out of a wild card. And at this point, this season is toast. These players are boring. The games are boring. Let's do like we have in the past, which worked, and call these people up, let these young guys play. Whatever young guys you have now on the roster, let them play. Because we know what Goldschmidt, Carpenter, Crawford, guys like that bring to the table. What we don't know is what's down the farm and what they might emerge as.
2 of the 3 names he just mentioned you're probably not going to see again this season, in Carpenter and Crawford.
Yeah.
I don't think. All right, go ahead, T-Bone.
Yeah, you're probably not seeing those guys. I will say 2 things. First, to that mic drop, he's 100% right to where they haven't had those young guys end up developing here at the big league level. This was supposed to be the year in which you saw the steps forward for Nolan Gorman, Lars Nootbaar, Donovan. And even if it wasn't step forwards, could it be like the same? And instead, you've seen all 3 guys take a step back. Now, I don't know if there's an injury to one or all of those guys that's kind of slowing things down. If there is, and there's something that comes out at the end of the season, okay, it makes more sense. But for right now, it's disappointing that those guys, on top of Jordan Walker, have either had significant step backs or so much significance to where they had to send Jordan Walker down to get things right. To the first mic drop, I just disagree with the notion that they should have been sellers at the trade deadline.
I'm with you.
I think you were buyers because you were right there in the playoff race, and it was clear, okay, you have a couple of needs. Now, if they gave up like significant prospect capital to the Chicago White Sox, like maybe they trade 3 top 20 prospects for Fedde and Pham, there's a fair argument to be said, should they really be moving prospect capital for a mediocre team? But they got those guys for nothing. And then they got a reliever, which they probably should have shot for a little higher of a reliever, but they got Sean Armstrong for essentially nothing. An asset in Dylan Carlson that wasn't going to play for the St. Louis Cardinals. To me, they should have been buyers at the trade deadline. I like the moves that they did at the time. They were very Cardinals-y. Like Eric Fetty's ceiling is as a number 3, but it was a good move. It patched the holes on the roster. It patched they needed a right-handed bat in the outfield. They needed a guy that could be slotted into this rotation, and then the Cardinals version, be their number 2. And they needed a bullpen arm. I thought when they filled those 3 holes, maybe they wouldn't end up finishing with like a plus run differential, but they would at least be a team that was solid, that could play a little above 500 baseball and keep themselves in the playoff race. I didn't see everything just all of a sudden hitting the fan, and the offense doesn't score. The pitching's been really bad since the trade deadline. I didn't see that coming.
You won 5 of 8 series in the month of July going into the All-Star break. And the only series that you lost was the Pirates one, where I think you saw Skeens and Keller, so you expected to be low-scoring games. And you lost the 2-game set against the Kansas City Royals, which was a rain delay. But other than that, you won versus the Pirates, you won versus the Nationals, you won versus the Cubs, you won versus the Braves, you won versus the Rangers. Like, you won the series against teams that you needed to prove to the general manager to go out and make an upgrade. There was no point in selling off when you were a playoff team still picking up series wins. The problem was you fell off the cliff fast, and that was your offense that you weren't going to fix at the trade deadline. So we'll get to more mic drops on the other side, but coming up next, we've got the Junk Drawer here on 101 ESPN.
Open it up. The Junk Drawer with BK and Ferrario.
Brought to you by Fenton Bar and Grill. Best trashed wings in Missouri. Dine in, carry out, 7 days a week.
Get to a quick junk drawer story here, and then we'll get back into the Blues on the other side. T-Bone, what do you got today?
Do you guys like donuts with a little cream filling on the inside, or
No.
are you guys out on that?
Hate them. I think cream filling donuts are disgusting.
Yeah, no, jelly, anything. I don't want anything
Nasty.
coming out of my donut.
Man,
Yeah.
You know what? This is the most we've ever agreed on something, because I don't
hate
I
the
don't like
people
cream in my donuts.
It's not the people that put custard in donuts and eat them are just disgusting.
Not a fan. Now, I'm curious. I'm assuming you're probably out on this then, but I saw that Krispy Kreme and Dr. Pepper are reportedly launching a collab with a Dr. Pepper cream-filled donut. In or out? Would you try that?
No, barf. I hate Dr. Pepper. I think Dr. Pepper's nasty. Yeah. Really, Grant? That's where we're going to disagree on a food topic. Dr. Pepper.
Dr. Pepper's my favorite soda.
Same with me.
Coming from the man that just does salt and chicken as a daily meal, we're going to argue about Dr. Pepper.
Okay, salt and pepper.
No, just salt. I don't think you put pepper on it.
I would actually try this just because I'm curious what that would taste like. You know, because like
trash.
You know, some people, I would think if you were going to do a collab, and maybe there is a filling out here like this, if you're going to do a collab like that, I would think it'd be like a coffee flavored kind of cream in there, you know, because like some people dip their donut in coffee. Like that one I could see. Nobody's out here dipping their donut in Dr. Pepper that I know of.
Well, Grant is.
I just want to try it to know what it tastes like because I am a Dr. Pepper fan. I don't think it'd be very good, but I want to try it and find out.
So look, I'm curious because is it the consistency of like normal Dr. Pepper soda inside the donut, or is it like cream?
It's like a cream. It's not like actual Dr.
What, you
Pepper.
think you're buying it? Soda comes out of your donut?
Well, it wasn't explained to me. I don't know. This sounds like a crazy idea anyway.
What I will say, Dr. Pepper cream-filled donut.
I missed that part. What I will say is that, like, you have when you're baking cakes, like some people will use like Sprite or Coke, and it'll be like flavored. I wonder if you made like a Dr. Pepper flavored donut where it's like the dough was made with Dr. Pepper in it.
I'm out on that.
Look, I love me some Code Red Mountain Dew, but I will never eat something with Code Red custard in it. That's disgusting.
That's probably fair.
That's a little different.
I'm sure. I don't know if it would taste good, but I just want to know. You know, I gotta find out.
There's some things I'm better off not knowing. And Dr. Pepper custard donuts, or in Grant's world, Dr. Pepper fluid or liquid donuts are off the menu.
Alex,
for me
you're closed-minded and picky.
That's true. That's very true. That is everything. People say that a lot about me, that I am very picky when it comes to my food and drink choices. With Tanner Hendrickson and Grant Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. BK's trolling me in our text chain about my clock management.
That is terrible.
Yeah, okay. We're on the BK clock, even when he's not here. We'll come back and get back into the Blues because we talk a lot about Broberg, but what about Dylan Holloway? How much does that benefit this Blues team for the future? We'll discuss that next on 101 ESPN. Alex Ferrario with you to talk about my friend and insurance agent Tracy Bibb. Take care of the Ferrario family with our home and car insurance. And you hear me talk about the customer service, the personal attention that you get with Tracy. And I can give you a perfect example of it because a couple of weeks, or actually I guess it was a couple of months ago, we had a trunk of a tree fall on our shed in our backyard. And we weren't sure if that shed fell under the umbrella that was our house. And so called Tracy Bibb. She helped us out immediately. We had that problem resolved in a couple of days. Now I'll give you another example that's not Tracy Bibb. My brother-in-law and sister, their basement flooded a couple of months ago. And when it flooded, they called their insurance, didn't get a response, and they had to deal with a flooded basement for 2 weeks prior to them hearing from their insurance agent. Make sure your insurance agent is somebody who gives you the personal attention that you need. Tracy and her team preach all the time. It's not a matter of if something happens, it's when something happens. And when it does, you've got Tracy Bibb on your side. Give her a call today. Ask for a free non-committal quote. They're in the middle of Quote for the Cause right now, benefiting what the Risho and the Point are working on right now. As you could give her a call, and your free quote donates money to Quote for the Cause. 314-328-4260. That's 314-328-4260. Call Tracy today and tell her Alex Ferrario sent you. It's no fib. You're always in great hands with the Bibb. So we talk so much about Philip Broberg and the impact he could have on the Blues if he is not matched, his offer is not matched by the Edmonton Oilers. And along with Tanner Hendrickson and Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario, and Mark Spector, who was on with us Wednesday, just actually put another piece out, T-Bone. I was just reading it during the commercial break about, what is really at stake for Edmonton. And Spector believes that the Oilers are going to match Dylan Holloway and not Philip Broberg because Holloway is somebody that makes sense for their roster, and Broberg not so much for the future, and Holloway's a lot easier to move on if he doesn't pan out. But I want to talk about the opportunity that's in front of the Blues if Dylan Holloway is matched, because I think where the Blues are at right now is they have the depth at forward. I mean, we've already talked about the upgrades that they've made and what this lineup looks like. I mean, even without Dylan Holloway, there's a chance that Zach Bolduc doesn't make this roster. There's a chance that Dalibor Dvorsky doesn't make this roster. But now if you get to the point where Dylan Holloway is a part of this group, and as Mark Spector told us, there's a realistic shot that this guy could be a middle six forward for the longevity of his career. He's big, he's fast, he's got a really good shot, and he performed well in the postseason. I think Dylan Holloway is more of a bonus than Blues fans are giving it credit for. Because not only does he become a part of your core moving forward, the same that a Bolduc, a Snuggerud, a Dvorsky, a Stenberg, a Neighbors does, but he also gives the Blues, whether it's Doug Armstrong or Alexander Steen, more ammunition to deal from an area of strength. They've got a ton of forwards in their system already. You can't keep them all. And when something becomes a glaring hole for this team in the near future, whether it is defense and Broberg doesn't pan out, or maybe somebody in your top six doesn't become a top six forward and you have to go make a trade for one, you've got multiple weapons to use now with a Dylan Holloway in your tool belt.
Yeah, bringing him in just continues to add to the amount of pieces that you have there in that forward group. You'd have him. You got a couple of guys that are kind of more rentals, I would call them. Like, I don't think Fox is going to be a guy that is here long-term for the St. Louis Blues. But you continue to add some guys that can kind of help, piece you up until the point in this retool till you get the Dvorsky's, till you get the Jimmy Snuggeroods, potentially Stenberg if he ends up becoming a forward that can help them out offensively. But you're right, it does allow to where, there's competition. And I didn't even mention Zach Bolduc or Zach Dean, by the way. There's competition for those guys to try and make the roster here in the now. But also, if they don't, and you say, you know what, maybe we have a need, maybe we need to go out and add, whether it be this year, next year, another defenseman, whether it be a top 4 defenseman, third pairing defenseman, you've now got chips that you can be able to kind of shuffle around. I don't think it's always... We talk more so around like the trade, or not the trade deadline, around the NHL draft of, the Blues don't have defensemen in their system, so like they should draft the defenseman one with whatever pick number they have, right? No, I always say you just take the best available player, and if you get a little too top heavy on that side, well, you deal from that strength to try and fill out the need on the other side of things. And I think that's where they're at right now. They've got a bunch of forwards. We'll see how things kind of play out here. But, there's a chance where you're still a little overstockpiled on them, and you can maybe flip one of them for whatever it is that you may need. Worst case scenario, you just hold on to them, and there's a whole bunch of internal competition to try and take spots, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I do like the way that the Blues operate, where it is, we're not just going to hand you a job. Now, I personally would have liked to see Bolduc have a spot this year, but I don't necessarily mind the fact that they're saying, you know what, Bolduc's going to have to come in here and earn it. We liked what we saw, but we want to see him really take strides forward and really beat out a veteran to take his job.
I think what's interesting, too, is like if you just write these guys' names down. So I went through this, just of the guys who would be on the outside looking in if Dylan Holloway is a part of this roster. And the guys that wouldn't be on the NHL roster would be Snuggerud, Dvorsky, Bolduc, Dean, and Stenberg. Now, there's a couple of other guys that you could throw into this on the forward position, but I'm just going with these because these are the big names that get people excited. I think it's important to kind of label these guys as they are right now. Is there room for growth? Absolutely. But Snuggerud, a middle 6 forward, mostly a winger. Dvorsky, second-line center, maybe a third-line center. He's a one-of-a-kind guy. You don't have anybody else who identifies as a centerman in your organization. So he's kind of a unicorn in itself. But Zach Bolduc, middle 6 forward. Dean, probably a fourth-line centerman with the hope of a third-line centerman. And Stenberg, a third-line winger with the hope of a second-line winger. Like, none of these guys that I just mentioned, with the exception of Bolduc and Snuggerud, are top 6 wingers. You've already got Neighbors, you've already got Kyrou. Those guys are implanted in that area. And now you're talking about a Holloway, you're talking about a Pavel Buchnevich. Like, you've given yourself 3 or 4 guys to play 2 positions, and guess what it also does? We talked so much about when the Blues were a Stanley Cup contender, they had guys that could be top-line players playing on your third line. Man, if you get multiple guys who look like top 6 wingers, well, that pushes a Pavel Buchnevich down a little bit for you. That forces other guys to play in a lesser role than they're supposed to. I think Dylan Holloway is more of an impact to this roster than people are giving it credit for. And on the flip side of that, you brought this up to me, T-Bone, in the office when we were doing our show prep. In the position, and it sounds like, because JR referenced it in his piece yesterday talking about line combinations if Holloway and Broberg are a part of this team, what gives this Blues team better depth through their lineup? And that's what JR presented of Pavel Buchnevich as a centerman, and Schenn plays the wing, or Schenn stays at the center position, or Dvorsky goes to the center position, and Pavel Buchnevich goes to the wing.
Yeah, I find it fascinating to see what they're going to do with Brayden Schenn. I think they've kind of locked in their mind, at least for now, that Pavel Buchnevich is the second-line center. Unless, like, Dvorsky comes in as unbelievable, then maybe you end up bumping him out towards the wing, push Buchnevich out to the wing, and now you've got Dvorsky on that line. And Buch is probably a winger long-term, but I think he can be a guy that you're going to use as kind of a stopgap until you get that second-line center in place. I'm more interested to know what they do with Brayden Schenn this year, because down year for Brayden Schenn last year, I think he would tell you that, and he's had trouble staying healthy. Now, he's played games, but we know he's been dealing with injuries and playing through those. And I wonder if it is just at this point in his career, it's too taxing to be at the center position. So is it better off to say, okay, do we get better production out of a potential more healthy Brayden Schenn by putting him on the second line wing with Buchnevich and Brandon Saad? Or do you say, you know what, we have better depth, especially early on in the season, if Sundqvist ends up missing time due to his recovery from his ACL tear? is it better off to where we play Shen as a third-line center, which if he is going to be a center, I think that is where he is best suited, is as a third-line center. You have whether it be Bolduc or maybe you move someone else up, maybe you put up a Holloway and Saad on that second line if you wanted to. I find it interesting to see what they do with Braden Shen, because to me he's kind of the, I don't know if I'd call him a Swiss Army knife, but he's the guy that kind of really decides what you end up doing with this lineup. If he's on that third line center, okay, now you've got Foxa that can be the fourth line center while Sundqvist recovers, and maybe Nathan Walker's not in the lineup because of that.
I think best case scenario, and this is the if you get Dylan Holloway route, Shen does become a centerman, but so does Pavel Buchnevich. Or Dvorsky takes a center spot, and that's the one that you realistically have to think of, too. Does he earn a spot to where you can keep Pavel Buchnevich on the wing, and Dvorsky's your third-line center with Shen being the second line? I just, as much as I realize it could help this team, I don't want Pavel Buchnevich in my center position because I think he's got 40-goal potential, and I don't want a 40-goal scorer playing the center position because I think those 40 goals as a centerman become 25 goals. And I'm not sure Braden Shen can surpass the number of 20 to 25 goals in a season. I'm more high on him because I think last year was just a bad year, just overall off ice with the firing of Craig Berube and everything that went into it, and then the injuries took place. I think your team is better in the long run if Shen stays at center and Buch plays the wing. But if you do enter Holloway with this team and Dvorsky goes down to the minors, I can understand how you look at this and you say, look, our top line might be Kyrou Thomas-Neighbors with Pavel Buchnevich and Dylan Holloway playing with Braden Shen, or Shen moving to a third line. And don't forget, you got Brandon Saad in all of this as well. The depth of forward and what Curbs told us on Wednesday, the strength of the competition that will be taking place, I absolutely believe is the strong suit of this team for the upcoming season.
Yeah, I'm with you. They're in a tough spot, at least this year, with that second line center, because I personally don't think Braden Shen can play into the top six as a top two centerman on a contending team right now. And look, the Blues aren't a contending team, so maybe that's why you say, you know what, put him out there, see what it is. I do wonder if he can stay healthier in the long run if he is playing on the wing more.
It's possible.
And I agree. Like, I don't know if I agree with Buch has 40-goal potential, but I do think you probably maximize him best when he's on the wing. And that's where it is, where we've talked about it. It probably is the best-case scenario if Dvorsky is able to come to camp, really light things up, and say, that number two center job is mine. Now, will the Blues be willing to do it, or will they rather have him wait another year and develop? I don't know. But I think that is how you really start to open up how you can really piece this thing together just a little bit better, because I look at this roster now and the way that kind of JR lined it out in his projected lines, this looks like a solid group. Now, I don't know if they're a playoff caliber team, but I think it's better than it was a year ago. And maybe they don't end up with the same amount of points, but that could just be because the West got better around them as a whole. The one spot that is just blaring to me right now that's clearly looks like they need to upgrade it is that second line center. And I'm not saying like they need to go out and like make another offer sheet, for example.
Why not, man?
Maybe a little frisky, but I think you've got the internal guy, and Dvorsky. It's just a matter of how long till he is ready to go.
So I just wrote down my lines after JR did it yesterday on his piece, and just real quick, this is mine. I have Buchnevich with Thomas and Neighbors. I have Saad with Shen and Kyrou. I have Dvorsky making this team, and so I have Holloway with Dvorsky and Texier, and then my fourth line is Toropchenko, Foxa, and Joseph with Sundqvist and Walker as my extra forward. So you have opportunities. It really comes down to what happens in training camp, and if you find a way to get both Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg. Tanner Hendrickson, Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. Coming up in about 15 minutes, we've got One's Gotta Go, but coming up next is Andre Pallante or Miles Mikolas pitching for their job this weekend. We'll get to that next here on 101 ESPN. So this weekend, the Cardinals start the 3-game series, which is going to be the gauntlet of this stretch for the Cardinals and really their playoff lives. They go up against the Dodgers, and in these 3 games against the Dodgers, Miles Mikolas starts tonight. Andre Pallante goes up against Tyler Glasnow on Saturday, and then Sonny Gray wraps up the series on Sunday against Clayton Kershaw. And with Tanner Hendrickson and Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. Before we get deeper into this one, I do want to give away a 4-pack of tickets to the Cardinals. Where did my line go? Here it is. Bud Bash giveaway, the 4-pack of tickets in Tuesday night's Budweiser Bash game for the Cardinals and Brewers. The game features a limited edition Woody Williams bobblehead. You can text in now if you're texter 101 and can tell us the food item that T-Bone brought up during the junk drawer. That is just purely disgusting in my eyes, and Graham Francis loves. If you could text in what that was and be texter 101 to our text line at 314-399-9646, you will win a Budweiser Bash Tickets 4-pack, the Cardinals and Brewers on August 20th. You can get all the details on the season series of Budweiser Bash Cardinals games now at cardinals.com/promotion. So T-Bone, as I mentioned, Mikolas and Pallante going this weekend against Dodgers, and what I look at with this start against the Dodgers is I think both of these guys are pitching for their Cardinals jobs beyond this season, because you've got Lance Lynn, who's throwing a bullpen session later today, who my guess is he's going back into the rotation. When he comes back, I don't foresee them saying, let's put you in the bullpen. And you've also got Steven Matz, who's doing another rehab start for Memphis. And I would imagine he might be going into the bullpen, but they're using him as a starter in these rehabs. It really feels like both Mikolas and Pallante are pitching for their starting lives for the rest of this season. And honestly, what could take place in this offseason if they miss the playoffs? They could be gone beyond this year, depending on how they perform down the stretch.
Yeah, I don't know if Pallante is doing that for beyond next year, because I don't know if he's a guy that they're going to move on from. But Mikolas is a guy that he's going to have to show something to stay as a Cardinal into next season, because we've talked about it. His numbers have not been impressive this season. 5.3 ERA in his 24 starts, 8.9. He's done his job kind of at times of eating innings. He's got the worst swing and miss rate in all of baseball. He just doesn't miss bats. He's the guy, I just don't know what they're going to do with him. I expect that whether it be Lance Lynn, who we'll see if they decide to send him on a rehab or not. It sounds like since he's been still throwing that they might just put him back into the rotation. Steven Matz, maybe you throw him in the rotation as well. I think there's a chance this is his last rehab start. He's at 80 pitches, going 5 innings tonight, hopefully for the Memphis Redbirds. I'll be curious to see what they do with him. I think they're going to pull Pallante from the rotation. Now, I don't think people are going to like that, but I think that's the easy roster move for them to do.
Real quick, if they do that, then they need to stop lying and telling people that they're giving their team the best shot to to get to the playoffs. Because if you take Pallante out, who has been your best starter since July 1st, then you're lying to people saying that you're giving your team the best shot to get to the playoffs.
That's totally fair, because I've been saying that that's the case with Brandon Crawford still on the roster. How are you providing yourself the best chance when you don't when you're not maximizing your 26-man roster? Because I think these guys are going to be ready to be activated before we get to September. I think that was kind of what I thought originally was, okay, they're going to buy their time, and then you get your roster expanded and you add 2 pitchers. I don't know what they're going to do with Miles Mikolas. I don't think he's got a role in the bullpen because of what I said. He has the worst swing and miss rate in all of baseball. I don't know what you do with his spot. I'm not saying I feel a whole lot better by replacing Miles Mikolas with whether it be Steven Matz or Lance Lynn, but I just don't know what you do with him, because he has no value in the bullpen. They're not going to just, DFA him. That's not even an option because it would cost way too much money. I don't know what you do with Miles Mikolas. Maybe you go to a 6-man rotation, but then you're pulling an arm out of your bullpen. I have no idea what their plan is. I am fascinated to see what they decide to do with Steven Matz and Lance Lynn, and maybe you put those guys back in the rotation. Do you think I was thinking of this while we were getting ready for this segment. We've seen Steven Matz go through stretches where he looks really good. Can he provide, if you put him back in the rotation, can he provide a spark in this rotation over 5 to 7 start stretch to where he can kind of do what Brandon Pfaadt did for the Arizona Diamondbacks in the home stretch of last season?
Can he? Absolutely. I mean, we've seen it. That's the MO for Steven Matz. Is the last 4 or 5 starts, he looks like a dude who could be a legit 3 in your rotation, and then you're like, oh, well, look what we got next year. And then the start of the season happens, he gets injured, and he's not the same guy. Will he? I don't buy it, and I would not risk it with Steven Matz over Andre Pallante. If you're telling me I could have Steven Matz and the possibility of him adding a spark to my rotation over Miles Mikolas, I would do that in a heartbeat, because I do think he could provide you something in a small sample size. But if you're taking Andre Pallante out for Steven Matz, I don't think you're getting better. I think you're putting an unknown in a position of a guy who has been good for you.
Yeah, and the reason I bring that up is I go back, and I know people hate it when we reference this because, again, he is so streaky. He's gone through such very, very bad lows and a couple of highs with the Cardinals. But you look at the final 7 starts he had last year when he got healthy, you know. It was 7 starts, 38 innings pitched, a 1.86 ERA, and opponents were hitting 190 against him with a 537 OPS. He's got some decent swing and miss stuff. He was striking out a batter per inning during that run last year. I don't know if Pallante's got that in him, though he is pitching well. So I agree. He probably should stay in the rotation. It's just a matter of, though, how do you replace Miles Mikolas and what do you do with him? Does he just go to the bullpen and kind of gets the Gio role, where does he just see him in blowouts?
That's what you can't do, because I don't think he performs well in the bullpen. And now you're talking about a lost cause for a guy that I believe the Cardinals are like, oh, he's a part of our core.
I don't think they think Mikolas is part of the core anymore, because I think I think the goal is probably to trade him in the offseason. Now, they're probably going to have to eat money on it, but we've seen teams like the Pirates, teams that are rebuilding, they'll take on veteran guys, especially someone that is going to be on, I believe, the final year of his deal, because they need people to eat. They need people to eat innings in their rotation, and they don't care about the results.
But see, the Cardinals are going to need that too next year, and I just don't buy that this team, who went into the offseason of saying pitching, we need starts more than quality innings. I just can't buy that they're going to get rid of a guy who has started every game for them this season.
Yeah, I don't know if they necessarily need it next year, especially if they're going to go kind of the youth movement with the offense. They're going to have more arms that should be getting closer to being here. If everything, and not everything's going to go right for them, but if things go well for the Cardinals in their development, by about this time next year, you should potentially see Quinn Matthews, potentially see a TK Roby, potentially see a Tink Hensel if his development goes right, maybe a McGreevy and a Graceffel that are in the system. I'm not necessarily sure that you need Miles Mikolas next year, because you've already got Sonny Gray, Eric Fetty, potentially Steven Matz, Kyle Gibson if you decide to pick up his option, and Andre Pallante that can be kind of penciled in this rotation. Mikolas just doesn't fit into this rotation. So I think it's a lot better to just hit $10 million of his deal and send him to somebody to take on his contract. And then you can have your hands washed of the Miles Mikolas situation, so you don't fall victim to what we're talking about right now of what do you do with him if he has a bad year. Because I think their plan should be, let's say Matz comes back first, activate Steven Matz, and I would put Miles Mikolas in the bullpen. I know I know I said earlier this week or last week that, you know what, I think you keep him starting. You know what, they're pushing for the playoffs. Miles Mikolas just serves the long relief role where, hey, if the Cardinals are getting beat real bad, guess who's pitching? Miles Mikolas. If the starter gets hurt, guess who's coming in? It's Miles Mikolas. If the team is up really big, guess who's eating innings? It's Miles Mikolas. He gets kind of the Giovanni Gallegos role of, hey, he's not coming in high leverage spots. He's only pitching in games that are blowouts. I think that sets you up best to utilize a 5-man rotation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with you there. I do think that Miles Mikolas should go into the bullpen and you keep it as is. And then when Lance Lynn comes back, honestly, when Lance Lynn comes back, if Pallante is still pitching well, Lynn should be in your bullpen, and you've got two guys.
And he actually would have a role.
He works he works well with that, especially when you're talking about righties. I mean, you realistically could use Lance Lynn in a high leverage situation if we're talking about getting 3 outs against right-handed batters. The real question is going to be, will they do that? And you brought up the rotation, T-Bone, and that's something I wanted to touch on real quick before we get to one's got to go on the other side. I think what you laid out is how they should construct this rotation in 2025 with Sonny Gray, Eric Fetty, probably Steven Matz because he's going to be a part of this roster, pick up the option of Kyle Gibson, and then Andre Pallante. But if I were to be a bold Cardinals team, I'd have Gray, I'd have Fetty, I would move on from Steven Matz. I think I would move on from Kyle Gibson and keep Andre Pallante and go out there and make a big swing for at least one other arm that has high upside.
Yeah, it's interesting because I I don't know if they'll eat 2 contracts in an offseason. Now, maybe they should, especially if they want to try and cut payroll. The number one spot you're going to look at is probably the rotation. Move on Steven Matz, move on from Miles Mikolas. I would pick up Kyle Gibson's option because of what we just talked about, where you said, well, do they need someone that can eat innings for them? Kyle Gibson's that guy. Kyle Gibson can serve the role of Miles Mikolas, but be more effective. And he's at, I think, like $10 to $12 million. Perfectly affordable guy that you pick up his option. I do agree, though, that they should probably be looking to take a swing. I think you're probably looking for somebody, and I'm not saying you go out and you say, oh, maybe you go out and hand that big contract to Blake Snell. I don't know if they'll do that, but can you find somebody like James Paxton, who I was really into this offseason, that's got swing and miss stuff? There's a little bit of upside to him that you can bring in on like a 1-year deal that's got swing and miss stuff that if it hits, you end up getting a really good pitcher. There's also a chance that it really blows up in your face and you don't, but they probably can take some swings because they should have more depth in the system by the time you get to, June, July of next year.
He's Tanner Hendrickson. I'm Alex Ferrario. Coming up next, we're going to get to our Friday staple. One's got to go. You send us 3 scenarios. We will tell you which one's got to go on our Air Comfort Service text line, 314-399-9646. We'll get to One's Got to Go next year on BK and Ferrario on 101 ESPN.
Grant Francis here with a SportsCenter update brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling. Cardinals will hope to get back on track tonight as they are back after that sweep by the Cincinnati Reds out in Cincy. They're back against the LA Dodgers tonight, who just came off of a split in Milwaukee. That 4-game series they went 2-2 in, but they lost the last 2 of that series. So Dodgers looking to get some revenge on the Cardinals today. Cardinals are 60-61 coming into this one, hoping to get back to 500 against the Dodgers tonight. To try to do that will be Mikolas on the bump for Game 1 tonight. First pitch from Busch Stadium will be at 7:15. I'm Grant Francis. The SportsCenter update's been brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling, an independent American Standard heating and air conditioning dealer.
This is BK and Ferrario. Time now for One's Gotta Go. We offer up the talking points, and you get to pick which one's gotta go on 101 ESPN.
Count that big pen.
Well, the Open said it all. You text us in Air Comfort Service text line 314-399-9646. Also over on our YouTube chat, The Graveyard at 101 ESPN STL. You send us 3 scenarios. T-Bone, Grant, and I will tell you which one has to get up on out of there. Let's start with this, T-Bone, from our earlier conversation. One's got to go, young left-handed bat edition. Lars Nootbaar, Alec Burleson, Brendan Donovan, Nolan Gorman.
Oh, man. So, Burley stays.
Yep, that's mine too.
I think Donovan's going to stay. Even though it's been down here for him, he's still about league average. It comes down to Nootbaar and Gorman. People aren't going to like this. I would probably say Nootbaar. I still am bullish on Nolan Gorman, and he's just got pure power. And you know what? He's got a ton of swing and miss in his game. You hope that you can try and cut that down. Hopefully you can work on something in the offseason to fix that. Nootbaar's the one that, okay, so I don't know. 1, there's the health concerns. He hasn't stayed healthy for a full season. 2, I can get kind of his power from Brendan Donovan / Nolan Gorman. And I can, in theory, when he's right, get his on base from Brendan Donovan. So I would say Lars Nootbaar would be the one for me.
I'm with you, Tanner. I was going to say Lars Nootbaar as well, and I've been saying this for a while now, but he's not a bad player. I like Lars Nootbaar, but his value nationally is always it always has been higher than what he actually does on the field. Like, he'd be much more valuable to the Cardinals in what they could get back in return in a trade rather than what he does out on the field. So I'm going Nootbaar as well.
See, I would go Gorman. I totally get the Nootbaar thing, and I think because Brendan Donovan can play an outfield spot, I'd look at that. But I still think, with all of the hype that T-Bone mentioned, I still think the best bang for your buck in terms of what you get back is Nolan Gorman in a trade, and then you just hope that he doesn't make you pay. And I think that's the biggest hope right there, but I think the most return you're going to get would be in Nolan Gorman. From the 314, guys, one's got to go. Dr. Pepper-infused donut, mayonnaise coffee, the beer mile, or nasty jelly beans?
Oh, this one's easy because I saw it and it looked disgusting. It's the mayo and coffee.
You're going to do that after you vomited after the beer mile?
I would not do the beer mile again, but of those 4 things, I absolutely would not want to do mayo and coffee. That would ruin coffee for me. And I love coffee too much. Have it in the morning, have it when I get home after our show. I am not going to ruin one of my favorite drinks, so that is the one that's got to go. You could not pay me enough to do that.
Yeah, mayo and coffee is repulsive. Alex, when you had to do that for that punishment, I turned the radio off because I did not want to hear
it was disgusting.
what was happening.
Dude,
it just grossed me out.
It was thick when you take a drink, and you couldn't even shoot it because you couldn't swallow it. Oh, man, boo. I'd still get rid of the beer mile, though.
Really?
Because it's running, and it's most likely vomiting. Like, watching T-Bone vomit up that beer, I'm not about that at all. Like, if I'm going to vomit, I don't want it to be after I just did all of that exercising. So I'd drink mayonnaise and coffee any day of the week over doing a beer mile.
Well,
like,
you can't do a beer mile. You're still on LTIR with the toe.
Yeah, I still got a little bit of a limp with my toe, and if I lose it, then you can't run. You know, you got only one. You got only one good foot.
True, but that's the kind of excuse that I would say.
It's my excuse so I don't have to exercise. One's got to go. Bills miss the playoffs. Cincinnati is the AFC seed. Seed number 1, I should say, sorry. San Francisco wins the Super Bowl. So Bills miss the playoff. Bengals get the number 1 seed in the AFC, or San Francisco wins the Super Bowl. I'd get rid of San Francisco winning the Super Bowl. I don't know if I want to see that.
Really?
Bills missing the playoffs. Yeah, Bills missing the playoffs would be pretty interesting. Mostly because I'd be really curious how they adapt to that. Cincinnati getting the number 1 seed would be fun because now you've got some incredible storylines with the Chiefs and a team that's actually beating them up. I'm kind of growing to hate the San Francisco 49ers, so watching them not get a Super Bowl has been kind of entertaining.
Yeah, I think I would say get rid of Bills missing the playoffs. I think them making the playoffs would be good for the NFL. Get the storyline potentially Josh Allen going up against Mahomes. I would want to keep, the Bengals getting the 1 seed because it gives them their best chance potentially have home field advantage against Mahomes. The one guy we've seen beat him is Joe Burrow. I would say it would be the Bills one for me.
I almost think that the Jets making the playoffs would be more interesting because it's a team that hasn't made it in a really long time, and just the storyline behind Aaron Rodgers and everything, I think it'd get a lot of intrigue. So I like that one from the sense of if the Bills missed the playoffs and it was the Jets making it, the Dolphins could make it as well. But if it was the Jets making it, I think that'd be a really interesting storyline. I think I'm going to go with you, Alex, and take the 49ers out of this one just because, like you said, we've seen them there multiple times. They're in it every year, it seems like. So just something different would be nice. So I'll side on that one as well.
Justin sent one in, and I'm going to amend it a little bit here. So let's just go video game connections. So the games I'm about to say, or the consoles I'm about to say, the video games that go with it. Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo, or just those 3. We'll go Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo. One's got to go of those 3. And when you get rid of them, you get rid of all of the games that come with it.
Yeah, I'm trying. So Nintendo would be kind of like
Mario, things like that.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what is more exclusive to Xbox now, because they've kind of gotten to the point where they don't really have
Xbox
a separation.
Kind of, they're Halo. If I'm not mistaken, it's that Mass Effect that's a part of it as well. A lot of those like first-person shooter type of games, that's more Xbox.
Yeah, I would probably say Nintendo then, because I never really got into.
Really?
Yeah, I never really got into.
I guess that's true.
The Mario thing, like Mario Kart, that'd be the one I'd miss, but I could live without Mario Kart, So I would say Nintendo for me.
I'm not gonna
Grant
lie.
Doesn't play video games.
Yeah, I don't really play video games. I play NHL, and that's it. Literally, that's it. So I can't really sound off on this one. I will say between like the consoles themselves, I'd get rid of the Xbox.
Me too. Like, the controller still confuses the hell out of me. There's too many damn buttons.
I grew up on the PS4.
Buttons. Yep. I grew up on PlayStation, and I grew up on Nintendo, where there's like 7 buttons to use in that one. Let's do a couple more before we get out of here and hit the rewind. One's got to go sports preseason edition. NBA, NHL, NFL, Major League Baseball. I mean, Grant and I hate the NHL preseason because we're done after 3 of them. I despise Major League Baseball spring training.
Oh, like I love spring training.
It is so much hype, which, I mean, don't get me wrong, like that first week or 2 is so much fun, but waiting an entire month to get through of spring training, watching a ton of dudes that I'm not going to probably ever see play baseball, it's like if they just had 2 weeks of it, I'd be on board with it. So I would get rid of baseball.
Man. NBA, they play a little bit. You see the bench. That one I can kind of stay in. I love spring training because you get to see a lot of the prospects play as well.
NHL's fun, too. As much as we hate it, it's just because it's long.
I would say I'd probably get NHL, you get to see some of the kids as well.
It's the NFL.
I would get rid of NFL because now that there's only 3 preseason games, a lot of those guys that you end up seeing, and a lot of teams now rest their starters, so you don't even get to see most of them. I would say it's probably the NFL for me. I still will watch it. Most of the time, though, now you're not even getting like the good stories of, wow, this guy was signed as the 90th man to be on the practice squad, and now he's made the team out of training camp. Hard to make the team out of training camp when you don't see a lot of the starters, and you only have 3 games to make an impression. So I'd say NFL goes.
I'm going to be honest. What goes on in the NBA preseason? I've never paid attention.
It's honestly funny because it's basically they play their starters. For the most part, they only get like 5 games, and they'll probably rest the starters on like 1 or 2 of them. They play like 15 minutes, and then the bench eats up a ton of more minutes. There's not a whole lot. It's a lot like kind of, I don't know what the best comparison would be. It's kind of like spring training baseball, where you see the starters for a little bit, and then for the most part, you're going to end up seeing more of the bench.
Yeah, I think I changed my answer. I think I go with the NFL. I mean, I hate baseball for how long it is, but, man, the preseason just is, like, there's no point in watching it. Like, you're watching it for third-string quarterbacks. You're watching it for dudes that are going to get cut. It's just not enjoyable. So I think you convinced me on that one, T-Bone, as much as I dislike the longevity of Major League Baseball spring training. Tanner Hendrickson, Graham Francis, I'm Alex Ferrario. We'll wrap it up and close out the week with the Rewind next on 101 ESPN.
Let's run it back with the Daily Rewind on BK and Ferrario. Brought to you by Gloria Loom, your home sold guaranteed realty. Selling your home begins at GloriaHasTheBuyers.com.
Join 101 ESPN for the second annual Blues and Brews on Friday, September 20th at the Anheuser-Busch Brewery. I'm sure after Tuesday, a lot more Blues fans are going to be fired up for the season, but it's a perfect way to get excited with this outdoor street party. It's going to feature live music from country music star Matt Stell and St. Louis's own Charles Glenn's band. Plus, appearances by Blues players, Blues alumni, food trucks, 101 giveaways, and so much more. We will all be out there hanging out at the brewery on September 20th. Tickets are just $20 and they're on sale now. You can learn more about this over at 101ESPN.com. ESPN.com. And as we close things down, we'll hit the rewind today. If you missed anything from today's show, you can check it out up on our podcast page, 101ESPN.com, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Always presented by Dobbs Tire and Auto Centers. We talked with Daniel Nugent-Bowman from The Athletic, the Oilers insider, who told us that there's serious potential, at least viewed in the Edmonton Oilers organization, of top pair for Philip Broberg. So we'll await that on Tuesday at 9:30 is when the expectation, that's at least the 7-day mark is, of when the Oilers have to respond. But T-Bone, let's rewind it today with this series and real schedule that's about to take place for the Cardinals. The next 22 games are an absolute gauntlet, taking on the Dodgers, the Brewers, the Twins, the Padres, the Yankees, and the Brewers once again. All of that, by the way, with only 1 day off, as the Cardinals currently sit 4 games out of a wild card spot. You did the math earlier today on the show that essentially in this 22-game stretch, if you're talking about the playoff hopes and you're still a Cardinals fan holding out optimism, you're talking about, at minimum, going 500 in this 22-game stretch against these top teams, and then finishing off the season going 13-6, 14-5, something like that.
Yeah, I think the Cardinals need to be shooting for about 85 wins, and that feels like the conservative side. I think it may even be more than that for that last wild card spot. But if you operate on that, shoot for 85 wins, in the final 41 games, you're going to have to go 25-16. And I think the best way to set yourself up for that, look, it's going to be tough. Even if they go 500 in this gauntlet of a stretch that they've got coming up here with 22 straight against playoff opponents, if you go 500, you're going to have to win 14 of the final 19 games. If you can kind of find a way to be a little bit above that, maybe win 13 of these 22 games, which is a tough task, but this is where the Cardinals put themselves. Now you're looking at where they could have to win 12 of the last 19, and they've done that before this season. They did have a stretch earlier in the year where they went 12-7. It was right around the time when they kind of started to turn things back around when they played the Angels, right around that Mother's Day mark when their season started to spin back up in positive momentum. So we've seen the team be capable of playing that stretch, going 12-7 for a 19-game stretch. But they've got to keep themselves in it first before they get to the back part of their schedule. To me, it comes down to the offense. You know, we talk about the pitching. I think the pitching is going to have to be better. I'm fascinated to see how short a leash Miles Mikolas will have tonight against this mighty Dodgers offense. But it comes down to their offense. Is their offense going to give them a fighting chance? Because though the pitching was bad in Cincinnati at the Great American Small Park, look, the offense didn't give them any chance. They scored 4 total runs in 3 games. You're not going to win any game typically, or it's going to be a tough time to take 2 of 3 from anybody if you're only going to score 4 total runs. So the offense is going to have to find a way to turn this around, and I know they haven't done it all year, so it's probably unlikely, but that's what's got to happen. The offense has got to turn around. They got to hit with runners in scoring position.
I know it sounds like a Captain Obvious statement, but if you do find a way to go 500 or better in this stretch, then I think there should be a lot of optimism still for this Blues, because before this Cardinals team, because going 13-6, 14-5 in the month of September, that doesn't seem unrealistic, because there are legitimate teams that are going to be at the point where they're playing all of their younger players, finding out who they are. You know, teams like the Colorado Rockies, by the time you take on the San Francisco Giants, you know, those teams are going to be seeing what they have in the system. Now, the Pirates and the Reds are probably going to cause you some fits. The Seattle Mariners pitching are going to cause you some fits, and the Guardians are going to cause you some fits. But you have a little bit of wiggle room if you can go 500 or better in this stretch. The part that I don't have optimism for is 500 or better in this stretch, because like you said, T-Bone, you're relying on this offense, but you're relying on an offense that since August 1st has been essentially one of the worst in the National League. Like, they're only averaging about 3.5 runs per game, and you're talking about taking on Tyler Glasnow and Clayton Kershaw, a Milwaukee Brewers pitching staff that has been lights out, the Padres who have been lights out, the Yankees who have been lights out. Like, your offense is going to have to do something that we have not seen them do yet this season for a stretch against teams that are all fighting for supremacy in their divisions. That's the part that's hard to believe.
Yeah, well, it comes down to that 4 spot for me in the lineup, that cleanup spot. We talked about it yesterday. Their cleanup spot, bottom 5 in terms of production, in terms of OPS so far this year. We know who's probably going to be there. The lineup's not out yet. I haven't seen it. It's probably going to be Nolan Arenado. Can Arenado he's probably the guy that you have to circle and say in this stretch, is he the right-handed bat that can really turn this around, start hitting for some power, and then we'll see how the lefties do. A lot of right-handed starting pitching coming up here in this stretch. How do those left-handed bats respond? Does Lars Nootbaar figure things out? He's really struggled in the last month. Can Nolan Gorman figure it out? And does Brendan Donovan be able to reach a little bit more of his ceiling, because he hasn't gotten there yet this season as well?
Well, and I hope Cardinals fans are excited not to see Jordan Walker until Sunday, unless he's a pinch hitter, because no lefty starting, unless it's to be determined tonight. So maybe you get a lefty pop up, but I thought they announced it was a right-hander. You'll just not see Jordan Walker until Sunday. Just continue that platoon role, which makes a ton of sense for him. So that's going to do it for us. We'll react to the Dodgers series on Monday. BK will be out once again, so you'll get me, Grant, and Tanner. I promise I won't be in this little shack in my house. I'll be back in studio with the fellas. But T-Bone or BK will be back with us on Tuesday. Phenomenal job by Grant Francis filling in, by T-Bone for taking on a bulk of the work since I'm back here in my house. We'll have a great weekend, everybody. We'll talk to you on Monday. The Fast Lane coming up next from 2 to 6 here on 101 ESPN.